Good morning. I convene this hearing of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations to discuss the security of the HealthCare.gov website. Americans want to know the answers to two simple questions. Is my information secure if I use HealthCare.gov, and why should I believe the administration that it is? It has been nearly 50 days since the launch of HealthCare.gov, and the website is still not functioning at an acceptable level. This is despite the numerous promises and assurances the public was given by members of the administration leading up to and over the several months up to the launch of the website. This committee heard directly from Secretary Sebelius, Administrator Tavenner, and CCO Director Gary Cohen that they were ready by October 1. We are all deeply troubled that the individuals who want to be in charge of America's healthcare system could not even predict accurately if the website would work. And those predictions were not just limited to the website. We've also been routinely promised that the website was safe and that Americans' personal information would be secure. When Administrator Tavenner last appeared before this committee, she informed us that testing began in October of last year, that end-to-end testing would be completed by the end of August this year. We have now learned that this simply was not the case. End-to-end testing is not possible when the website isn't completed. Today we hope to hear from our witness about how much of the website remains to be built. If the first parts of HealthCare.gov have been this problematic, we are obviously concerned about parts that are being constructed under current pressures and time constraints. The witness for our first panel today is Mr. Henry Chao, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and we want to thank you for coming and testifying today. I can only imagine how stressful the last few months have been for you, so welcome here. Yet I hope you can appreciate the fact that HHS has a ways to go to regain the trust of the American people on this website. They were promised a functioning website as easy as buying a TV on Amazon, and what they got was a train wreck. The reason the trust of the American people may be so difficult to regain is because every day new revelations emerge that show this wreck was entirely foreseeable. Last week, this subcommittee uncovered emails from CMS showing that as early as July of this year, Mr. Chao, our first witness, was worried that the company primarily responsible for building the website, CGI, would, quote, crash at takeoff, unquote. Today, this subcommittee also released materials showing that as early as March to April of this year, top administration officials were well aware that HealthCare.gov was far off schedule and testing of the website would be limited. We have also learned that HealthCare.gov was only launched after Administrator Tavenner signed an authority to operate, which included a memo warning her that a full security control assessment was not yet completed. This memo makes it clear that the highest levels of CMS knew that there were security risks present. Yet again, while this document was being signed in private, administration officials were promising in public that in only a few days the American people would be able to use a perfectly functioning website. A few weeks ago, Secretary Sebelius told this committee that the highest security standards are in place and people have every right to expect privacy. I hope that today we hear what those standards are from not only from Mr. Chao, and also from our second panel as well. Our second panel features some of the contractors that are responsible for the security of HealthCare.gov, and I thank them for testifying today. I'm disappointed that one of the companies responsible for security, Verizon, chose not to testify today. We will certainly be following up with Verizon so that they are accountable to the public for their work here. Today's hearing is not just about the website. Websites can be fixed. What cannot be fixed is the damage that could be done to the American people if their personal data is compromised. Right now, HealthCare.gov screams to those who are trying to break into the system, if you like my healthcare info, maybe you can steal it. But I now recognize for an opening statement Ms. DeGette of Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Murphy. I want to add your thanks to Mr. Chao for being here today, as well as the three contractor witnesses, MITRE, CCSI, and Foreground. We must make sure that the data on HealthCare.gov is secure. Everybody can agree on that. The American people must know that their data is protected when they go on the site to find a quality, affordable insurance plan for themselves or their families. This is critical. However, my fear is that today's hearing is actually less about the facts of the security of HealthCare.gov and more about political points and undermining the ACA. Now, without a doubt, no one could disagree there are troubling problems with the rollout of the exchanges. 3 weeks ago, our full committee held the first hearing on the inexcusable fact that HealthCare.gov seems to have been broken since it was very first launched. And 3 weeks later, while improving, it's clearly not up to speed. As I've said before, the exchanges need to be fixed, and they need to be fixed fast, so that the American people can easily access quality, affordable insurance plans open to them. I hope we'll have another hearing after the November 30th deadline to see how they're working. My fear about this hearing today, though, is that it won't enlighten the American public, but instead raise unjustified fears about security piling on all of the other issues. Now, obviously, as I said, we need to make sure that the data on HealthCare.gov is secure, but we should not create smoke if there's no fire. So before we begin, I want to give the American people some peace of mind based on the facts that we know about security on HealthCare.gov. First, and critically, no American has to provide any personal health information to HealthCare.gov or to insurers in order to qualify for health coverage and subsidies. To make sure about this, I went on the exchange myself the other day. And that's because the ACA bans discrimination based on pre-existing health conditions. Before the ACA became law, Americans buying coverage on the individual insurance market had to fill out page after page of personal health information to apply for insurance. But no longer, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, Americans do not have to turn over any private health insurance to get coverage. Second, while no website in the government or in the private sector is 100% secure, unfortunately, there is a complex and detailed set of rules that HHS must follow to make sure that data on HealthCare.gov is secure. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Mr. Chao, about these security issues today. The agency has a long record of maintaining personal information about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and many areas, and has never had a significant leak of information. HHS must comply with the Federal Information Security Management Act and National Institute of Standards and Technology guidelines to protect information systems and the data collected or maintained by HealthCare.gov. And like all federal agencies, HHS is required to develop, document, and implement an agency-wide information security program. To date, our committee's investigation has found that CMS has complied with every important security rule and guideline. They hired a small army of contractors to make sure the website is secure, and they're going to talk to us about it today. The memo, Mr. Chairman, that you talked about at our last hearing, that identified some security concerns, primarily a lack of end-to-end testing on HealthCare.gov, but it also outlined a mitigation plan. One we learned was that the agency was following to mitigate security risks. So I want to hear from the contractors and from you, Mr. Chao, if in fact these findings are being heeded. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I have to raise one more issue in my remaining minute, and that is this committee's grand tradition of bipartisanship investigation. Apparently, the committee last Thursday received a memo from CMS, Red Team discussion document. The majority on this committee did not share this memo with the minority on this committee until yesterday, coincidentally, just after they leaked this memo to the Washington Post. Now, and if you saw the Washington Post front page today, you saw a big story, and Mr. Chairman, you were quoted in that story, talking about concerns about the readiness of the exchange based on this memo. I know that's not the topic of this hearing today, but I've got to say it is not in the tradition of the committee to conduct investigations that way. And when the majority received this memo, it should have immediately provided it to all of the members so that we could read it and find out. We are all just as concerned about making these exchanges work. And to that end, Mr. Waxman and I have written a letter expressing our displeasure, and we would like to enter that into the record at this time, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, and I'll look forward to talking with you more about these procedures. I know that these came as part of a couple 100,000 pages of documents we're going through, but we should, well, I'll be glad to review that with you because I certainly respect my colleague on these
Certainly
matters.
you were able to find it in time to give it to the Washington Post in time for today's hearing and to be quoted in the Washington.
We'll have a good discussion on that. I thank my colleague whose time has expired. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, for months, administration witnesses have come before this committee and assured us that the implementation of the President's health care law was on track, their words, and that HealthCare.gov would be ready for the October 1 launch. But why not give the straight story to the Congress and the public? Because back on April 18th, Secretary Sebelius testified in this very room, we have the federal hub on track and on time. I can tell you we are on track. Those are her words. But we now know that the Secretary's testimony did not match what was happening behind the scenes. 2 weeks before she testified before this committee, Secretary Sebelius was present at an April 4th meeting where experts identified significant threats and risks launching the site on October 1st. The administration was on track for disaster, but stubbornly they stayed the course, repeating their claims that this all was well and on track right up until the mess that launched on October 1. And even after the launch, administration officials insisted that the volume was primarily the culprit when they, in fact, knew otherwise. But our oversight of the health law is not just about a website. No, it's not. It's about whether the public can trust and rely on this healthcare system that the administration has been building for over 3 years and spending hundreds of millions of dollars. The failure of this website has significant consequences for all Americans. One important question is whether individuals will be able to enroll and obtain coverage by January 1. Security is another critical concern. How can the public trust a hastily thrown together system in which meeting a deadline was more important for the administration than conducting complete end-to-end testing of the site's security? Mr. Henry Chao, Deputy Chief Information Officer of CMS, is here to answer those questions about CMS's management of the Federal Exchange and the implications for security. And Mr. Chao, I do understand that you're a career employee and have been at CMS for years, and I know, as Chairman Murphy indicated, that the last few months have not been particularly easy. Last March, you were one of the first to publicly offer a glimpse of the true situation when you candidly remarked about the website and said, let's just make sure it's not a third world experience. Documents produced to the committee paint a clear picture that the administration officials, in fact, knew for months before the October 1 date about delays and problems with the website development. Mr. Chao, you have been responsible for managing the development of the HealthCare.gov, but I can imagine many matters were outside of your control. And given the lack of end-to-end testing, I hope that you can explain to us today why the administration felt confident in the security of HealthCare.gov when the system went live on October 1. We're also joined by 3 companies that were awarded contracts by CMS to provide security services for the Federal Exchange. These companies are here also today to answer questions about their roles. I know the subjects of security present certain sensitivities, and I'm glad that they made the decision to accept our invitations to testify and inform us about how HealthCare.gov works or doesn't. One thing that we have learned, there are countless contractors involved in building this website, and responsibilities are divided, very divided. It is a complex system, I know, but we'd like to know how the delays in rushed implementation have affected or complicated the ability to perform the security work for the website. I yield the balance of my time to Dr. Burgess.
I thank the chairman for the recognition, and I do want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Pretty broad agreement. The implementation of the Affordable Care Act has been problematic, and rather than getting better, it may be getting worse. We've got low enrollment numbers, a website so bad that it's required the appointment of a glitch czar, canceled plan, broken promises from the president, just for starters. These initial problems break the surface of the deeper issues that lie ahead for not just the law, but for the American people that must live under the law. And Mr. Chao, you probably, prior to anyone else, sounded the alarm at that speech to AHIP, and I know you're tired of hearing it, but I will tell you once again, your comments that you're just trying to prevent the website from becoming a third world experience. I admire your ability to see over the horizon and tell the problems before they come up and hit you in the windshield, but also you're the one who recommended that it was safe to launch the website on October 1st. So what happened in those 6 months that led yourself and others in the administration to believe that this law was in fact ready for prime time. Not only did the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services fail to establish basic functionality, but HealthCare.gov's flaws continue to pose a threat to the security of Americans' personal data. And just on a personal note, when I went to HealthCare.gov this morning, it was still not functional. Another website, HealthSherpa.com, can actually tell me about the plans that are available in my area. We know it was possible to do this. We are all wondering why it wasn't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chairman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The last 6 weeks have been a difficult one for supporters of the Affordable Care Act. The troubled rollout of the website prevented many of our constituents from signing up for the affordable, high-quality coverage for which they now qualify, and it has been relentlessly exploited for political gain by Republican opponents of the law. I was interested to hear the phrase in the two Republican statements, maybe in all of them, we don't want a third world website. Well, let me tell you what is third world. Third world in this country is when we leave millions of people unable to get insurance because they have pre-existing medical conditions or they can't afford it. No other industrial country allows such a thing to happen. But that's what Republicans who have opposed this law would have us return to. I think we're turning the corner on the website. On Friday, Jeff Zients, the administration's point person on HealthCare.gov, announced 2 key metrics of improvement, and it seems to me these are all very good signs the website is getting better. Additional improvements are still needed, but HealthCare.gov means more and more people will be signing up for coverage as that website becomes more usable. I want to tell you what's happening in California. In the first month, 35,000 people enrolled in the exchange, over 70,000 qualified for Medicaid, and state officials say that the pace of enrollment is increasing. It's just the first 12 days of November, enrollment from the first month almost doubled. Now, I know we're looking today at the issue of data security on HealthCare.gov. It's an important issue. We should begin by acknowledging that the ACA represents an enormous step forward for privacy because when people apply for insurance coverage, the law bans them from being asked questions about their underwriting, about their medical conditions, about the privacy of things that affect their health, because it's not necessary to ask those questions. They're not going to be denied insurance coverage because of previous medical problems. But there is some personal information that people are going to be asked for when they sign up, and we need to ensure that this information is protected. This question came up repeatedly when Secretary Sebelius was before us. She told us the department is placing a high priority on the security of the website, and the highest security standards are in place to protect personal information on HealthCare.gov. I hope this hearing will be serious, even-handed inquiry, but I fear that some of my Republican colleagues may exaggerate security concerns to stoke public fear and exaggerate it so that they could dissuade people from even signing up. This is exactly what this subcommittee did when they launched an investigation into nonprofit community organizations serving as healthcare navigators. They were harassing these people in order to prevent them from helping people learn what's available to them. Mr. Chairman, yesterday we learned that you have been withholding important investigative documents, leaking them to the press before even providing them to the Democratic members and staff. And I sent you a letter this morning describing why this is a violation of the committee's precedent. It is not the way this committee has traditionally operated, and it raises concerns about whether these hearings are becoming another partisan attempt to weaken the Affordable Care Act. The committee should not go down that road. We should be using our oversight powers to improve the Affordable Care Act, not to sabotage it or to discourage Americans from signing up for quality care. I want to yield the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Dinkle.
I thank the gentleman. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I'm pleased to be here, and I'm certainly pleased that my subscription to the Washington Post is in effect so I can find out what's being leaked by my Republican colleagues to the media. This is interesting. We have clearly a violation of the practices, traditions, and histories of this committee and the investigations it's done. I speak as a member who's run more investigations than anybody in this room, including probably more than all of them put together. Here we have a breach of the responsibility of the leadership to make information available to the committee at the same time they make it to the press. I find that difficult. But worse than that, I find it intolerable that this committee is running around fishing for trouble where none exists. I feel a little bit like the old maid who came home and looked under the bed to find out if there was somebody there, hoping, in fact, that there would be. Unfortunately, there is not. I have seen no evidence of any complaints or any evidence of misbehavior with regard to the information that is controlled by the government. I would urge this committee to spend its time trying to make this situation work and see to it that we collect the information that's necessary, make the website work, and see to it that we register the Americans so that we can cease being a third world nation, both with regard to how the Congress runs and how the health care of this country works. We are down around the third world nations in the way that we take care of the health of our people. Look at the statistics. It'll give you a shock.
Gentleman's time has expired. Thank you very much. And now I would like to introduce the witness on our first panel for today's hearing. Henry Chao has served since January 2011 as the Deputy Chief Information Officer and Deputy Director of the Office of Information Services at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Some of his prior roles include Chief Information Officer in the Office of Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight and Chief Technology Officer for CMS. I now swear in the witness. You are aware, Mr. Chao, that the committee is holding an investigative hearing and when doing so has a practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to taking testimony under oath? The witness indicates no. The chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? Mr. Counsel indicates no. In that case, would you please rise, raise your right hand. I'll swear you in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. You may now give a 5-minute summary of your written statement and make sure the microphone is on and pulled close to you. Thank you, Mr. Chao.
Thank you, Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member DeGetti, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify about the security of the federally facilitated marketplace. The security and protection of personal and financial information is a top priority for CMS, which for decades has protected the personal information of the more than 100 million Americans enrolled in Medicare, Medicaid, and the Children's Health Insurance Program. The protection of personal information in CMS programs is a monumental responsibility. Every day, CMS enrolls new Medicare beneficiaries, pays claims timely and efficiently, and protects the information of consumers and providers. CMS used this experience and our security best practices to build a secure federal marketplace that consumers should feel confident in trusting with their personal information. CMS follows federal law, government-wide security processes, and standard business practices to ensure stringent security and privacy protections. CMS's security protections are not singular in nature. Rather, the marketplace is protected by an extensive set of security layers. First and foremost, the online application, is developed with secure code. Second, the application infrastructure is physically and logically protected by our hosting provider. Third, the application is protected through an Internet Defense Shield in order to protect unauthorized access to any personal data. Finally, several entities provide direct and indirect security monitoring, security testing, and security oversight, which includes the various organizational groups that CMS are reporting to key stakeholders with respect to security and privacy. This includes the Department of Health and Human Services, We also work in conjunction with U.S. CERT, which is operated by Department of Homeland Security. CERT stands for Computer Emergency Response Team, and the Office of the Inspector General of HHS. Each of these groups have varying roles to ensure operational, management, and technical controls are implemented and successfully working. The federally facilitated marketplace is protected by the high standards demanded of federal information systems, including regulations and standards prescribed by FISMA, NIST, the Privacy Act, and the directives promulgated by the Office of Management and Budget. CMS designed the marketplace IT systems and the hub to reduce possible vulnerabilities and increase efficiency. A large number of connections can cause security vulnerabilities. The hub allows for one highly secure connection between highly protected databases of trusted states and federal agencies instead of hundreds of connections that would have been established as part of how normal business practices in present day, how government connects organizations with each other to conduct business. A series of business agreements enforce privacy controls between CMS and our federal and state partners. Additionally, CMS designed the marketplace systems to limit the amount of personal data stored and protects personal information and limit access through passwords, encryption technologies, zoned architecture with firewall separation in between the zones, and various other security controls to monitor logging and to prevent unauthorized access to our systems. CMS also protects the federal marketplace through intensive and stringent security testing. While the federal marketplace has had some performance issues that could have been addressed through more comprehensive functionality and performance testing, I want to be clear that we have conducted extensive security testing for the systems that went live on October 1st. We continue to test for security on a daily and a weekly basis, any new functions or code prior to its launch. Of course, we are working around the clock to fix our performance issues so that the vast majority of users have a smooth experience with the site by the end of the month. While I cannot go into specifics about our security testing due to sensitive nature, I assure you that CMS conducts continuous antivirus and malware scans, as well as monitors data flow and protections against threats by denying access to known source bad IP addresses and actors. Additionally, we conduct two separate types of penetration testing on a weekly basis. The most recent penetration testing showed no significant findings. Also on a weekly basis, CMS reviews the operation system, infrastructure, and the application software to be sure that these systems are compliant and do not have vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are often fixed immediately on site and retested to ensure the strength of our system's security. Each month, we review our plan of action and milestones in order to continuously improve our system security. For the federally facilitated marketplace, we conduct security control assessments on a quarterly basis, which is beyond the FISMA requirements. As of today, no vulnerabilities identified by our tests have been exploited through an attack. Because of CMS's experience running trusted, secure programs, our fulfillment of federal security standards, and constant and routine security monitoring and testing, the American people can be confident in the privacy and security of the marketplace. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chao. I'll recognize myself first for 5 minutes. Mr. Chao, for the last year, members of this committee have asked you and others in the administration about the status of the launch of the President's HealthCare law. We wanted to know if you would be ready for the October 1st start of enrollment. Over and over, we were assured that all was well and everything was on track. The documents produced to the committee show a different picture, and I'd like to walk through a couple of them with you. In mid-March, you made a candid comment that you didn't want the exchange website to be a third world experience. Now the committee has learned about a report prepared by committee for senior HHS and White House officials and presented to these officials in late March and early April this year. That document is tab 1 of your document binder. This document highlights a number of risks facing HealthCare.gov's launch: late policy, delayed designs, and building time and limited to a test. When did you first see this presentation?
I haven't seen that presentation.
You were not briefed at all that there was a McKinsey report or presentation going on?
I knew that McKinsey had been brought in to conduct some interviews and assessments and report to our administrator in which I actually participated in some of those.
You participated in the interviews when McKinsey was exploring
right,
this?
but I was not given the final report.
Were you aware that they had met with Secretary Sebelius, Marilyn Tavenner, Gary Cohen, and others at CMS headquarters, HHS headquarters, the Executive Office building, and the White House? Are any of those incidences?
I believe there were some meetings that I heard of, but I don't know the exact dates when they occurred.
Now, part of your job is to make sure that this website is working. Am I correct?
Correct.
And so this was a major report that went as high up as the Secretary, maybe others we don't know, but saying that there were serious problems with this. And you're saying that even though you were interviewed by this, you did not ever have this briefing yourself?
No, I didn't.
You knew it existed?
I had heard that there was a final report out, but I didn't see the actual.
Did anything change for you in recognizing that this report was that this briefing was out there, basically telling people working on the HHS website that there were serious problems, no end-to-end testing, that this, all the various aspects of it?
I can't really tell you or speak to the contents of that report because I did not see it, and I didn't hear about it until actually it was in the Washington Post.
I mean, certainly, this is part of the concerns we have, and we're not making this stuff up. It's a matter that we have a website out there which untold millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions are spent on this website, which you have a major leadership role here. McKinsey is hired to come and present what the problems are and lay out a roadmap of those problems. I'm deeply concerned that this is something that you knew existed but had not read. So when were you first concerned that the administration wasn't going to be ready October 1 for the start of the open enrollment?
I never thought that.
But you made a comment about you didn't want this to be a plane crash.
Well, you're referring to the email
Yes.
exchange that I had with several.
Yeah, certainly that email didn't say everything's going fine, congratulations, team.
Oh,
It said I don't want this to be a... So you must have had some awareness that some problems existed.
Chairman, you have to understand, in the committee, that I've been working on this since mid-2010.
And we appreciate that.
And I'm a very cautious and I err on the side of caution and urgency because even back in 2010, I didn't believe that, everything would be easy and just, going along smoothly. So on a regular basis, I work with a lot of my contractors and my staff to sensitize them on the sense and level of urgency that
Absolutely,
involved.
especially when McKinsey was called in to prepare this document, which was important enough for them to have meetings at CMS, HHS, with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, at the Executive Office building, and at the White House, describing the level of problems. So I appreciate your sensitivity and awareness of that. I'm concerned you saying you have not even read this yet. Your testimony mentions the use of sensors.
But it requires that we go to a classified facility and to actually...
Only one sensor. But you're saying no other attempts to breach into the system have
Not
occurred?
successful ones, no.
Not since when?
Not successful ones.
All right. Now, when there are attempts, who do you report this to?
It's a combination of a series of authorities that are involved. All the
Law enforcement?
Well, through our incident reporting and breach reporting processes that go through our agencies, various key leadership, and then up through the department, as well as we have a security incident response center at the department that works with U.S. CERT at DHS.
Thank you. We'll follow up subsequently. No, I'm out of time, so we'll now recognize Ms. DeGette for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Chao, and also to the contractors, something you said in your opening, I think we should really take heed, which is you want to be careful not to divulge sensitive information about the security designs of the website. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I would say to you and to the contractors, and I think the majority would agree with me, if there's a question asked about that sensitive information, if you would just let us know, and then we can take it into executive session or whatever we need to do.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Mr. Chao, the chairman was asking you about this memo that you had, or it's an email, and it was on Tuesday, July 16th. If you can take a look at tab 7 in your binder, your document binder, please. That's a copy of your memo. And it looks to me in reading it that you were basically telling people that you wanted to make sure this website got up and going. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was your view, right?
Yes.
Did you take further actions after July 16th to try to get the website up and going?
It was a constant daily effort
And it still is, isn't it?
to improve it, certainly.
Yes. Okay. I'd like you now to take a look at tab 1 of your document binder. Now, Mr. Chao, this is the document that was given to the Washington Post yesterday by the majority and also simultaneously to the Democrats on the committee. This is the document the chairman was asking you about in his opening statement. Have you ever seen this document before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so you don't really know about whatever it might have said in that document, right?
No,
Okay, thanks.
I believe it's an executive level briefing for.
Right, but you weren't part of that briefing.
No.
Okay, that doesn't mean though that you weren't concerned about the website working and trying to make it
Of
work.
course,
Is that right?
I think in some of the interviews with McKinsey, I think some of what's in here could have potentially come from information that.
But you wouldn't know that because you didn't see it.
No, I didn't
okay.
see how it was formed.
I want to talk to you about the topic of this hearing now for a few minutes, and that is the issue of security. And I think I heard you say, both in your opening and response to questioning by the chairman, I just wanted to ask again, have there been vulnerabilities that have been discovered since the website unveiled on October 1st?
Security vulnerabilities
Yes.
have not necessarily been reported in terms of it being a security threat. I think there was some misuse of terminology of something like 16 incidents reported that in a previous DHS testimony a couple of days ago, but they were actually incidents involving disclosure of PII information, and it wasn't due to the result of anyone trying to attack the website.
What was it a result of?
It was dealing with some training issues at the call center, or we had a system issue where if you had similar usernames, and you chose a special character at the end of that username. For example, if your name is Smith and you chose an @ at the end of the username, sometimes that @ was treated like what we call a wildcard search, so they would return login information about someone else. But that, since it was reported, has been fixed as of today.
That problem has been fixed, so that's
Yeah,
not
it's
happening
not a
anymore.
hacker,
Now, you've been at the agency how long, sir?
Approximately 20 years.
And in working on the other sensitive areas, Medicare and other areas, is this common that sometime there might be a little bump like this?
Fairly common.
And what does the agency do when that is identified?
We have an extensive set of processes and controls in place, and with designated personnel to handle whether if they're, for example, security breaches versus the personally identifiable information type incidents, data loss.
And there's continuing testing, is that right?
Correct.
Now, MITRE has been performing assessments for CMS, is that correct?
Correct.
And what that does is it gives the contractors the opportunity to identify and resolve security vulnerabilities. Is that correct?
I think what's the benefit is that we use a set of contractors to independently test the system, so that we're not taking the words of, let's say, for example, QSSI or CGI themselves performing security testing. So this independent testing provides us a more balanced view of.
And is this ongoing,
Yes.
this independent testing?
On a daily and weekly basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Barton for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hearing Mr. Dingell's opening statement and to some extent what Ms. DeGette just said, I'm reminded of the movie Casablanca, and Claude Rains, the French chief of police, goes into Rick's cafe and says, "I'm shutting it down, I'm shutting it down." And Rick comes up, who's played by Humphrey Bogart, and says, "Why are you shutting us down?" And Claude Rains, the chief of police, says, "I'm shocked to learn that there's gambling going on," just as the croupier comes up and says to Claude Rains, "You're winning, sir." It is it is interesting and amusing that the past master of running this committee, Mr. Dingle, would be shocked and amazed that something was given to the Washington Post yesterday. Now, I'm not saying that it was. I don't know. But if it did happen, it wouldn't be the first time in this committee's history that documents were given to the press at approximately the same time they were distributed to the members of the
I didn't
committee.
say I was shocked. I said I was grateful I had the subscription to the Washington Post so I could keep track of what's going on in the committee along with my Republican
reclaiming
friends.
my time from which is my time, from my good friend. What shocks me is that Mr. Chao, our witness, who is the Deputy Chief Information Officer and Deputy Director of the Office of Information and Services for Medicare and Medicaid, who has been identified numerous times as the chief person in charge of preparing this website at the CMS level, was not aware of this document. I mean, to me, that's what's shocking. So my first question to you, sir, is when were you made aware of this McKinsey briefing document?
I think I was aware that some document was being prepared because I had gone through the interviews, but towards the end, when the briefings occurred, I was not part of them, nor was I given.
I mean, were you aware that McKinsey had been hired to come in and basically troubleshoot the status of the website?
I don't think they were brought in to troubleshoot. I think they were brought in to make an assessment by conducting various interviews with key stakeholders.
Did this group ever talk to you?
Yes.
Okay, so they did come in and at least visit with you.
Yes, they've interviewed me before.
Once, twice, a dozen?
Probably at least 2 times from what I recall.
Okay. Now, since you've been made aware of the document, have you studied it?
No, I was not made aware of the document. I was interviewed by the team that put that together. When the document was assembled, I didn't get a copy of it.
Okay. Well, as Mr. Dingle has pointed out, it's in the Washington Post. So, have you, before coming before this subcommittee this morning, have you perused this document?
No, I have not.
You have not perused this document. Okay. Well, on page 1 of the document, it says the working group, whoever that is, maybe you can enlighten us on that, determined that extending the go-live date, which as we all know is October the 1st, should not be a part of the analysis and therefore worked with a boundary condition of October the 1st as the launch date. Now, in plain English, what that means is somebody decided we couldn't delay the startup date, so by golly, we're going to assume it's going to go live on October the 1st. Were you a part of the working group that made that decision?
No.
Do you know who the working group was that made that decision?
No.
Do you have any idea? Was it the President and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or was it somebody below your level that made a decision somewhere in the bowels of the bureaucracy?
I think that it probably was a conglomerate of several leadership that came to that conclusion.
Okay. Did you have any decision-making authority yourself about when the startup date should be?
No.
That was not in your authority to say we're going to have to put it off or make a decision to go forward?
No, I do not get to pick what date.
Do you know who did have that decision-making authority?
I believe it's our administrator, Marilyn Tabner, and potentially other folks, but primarily I take my direction from Marilyn Tabner.
All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but I'll just say in summing up, we're concerned at multiple levels. But if you review this CMS document, which I did not see until just now, this morning, it doesn't take but about 10 minutes to go through and look at it, and it is absolutely clear that the startup of the website was not going to work well, if at all, on October the 1st. It was not. And it says that in here. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Dingell for 5 minutes.
For the recognition, and I'm thanking for holding this hearing. We are over 6 months now into the 6 weeks into the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And while functionality of the HealthCare.gov website has improved, it is clear there's more work to be done. And I'm hopeful that the subcommittee will work hard to achieve that goal. ACA is the law of the land, and I believe we share the goal of making it a functioning and secure website. However, it's important to remember that we can never fully eliminate the risks when building a large IT system, and so we must take steps to mitigate them. I would also urge that we take the necessary steps to make the program work, because this is the largest undertaking of this character I believe that we have ever seen by government anywhere. First question, yes or no? Is CMS responsible for developing the Data Services Hub and the eligibility enrollment tools for the federally facilitated marketplace? Yes or no, Mr. Chao?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Chao, are these projects required to comply with the Privacy Act of 1974, the Computer Security Act of 1987, the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, additionally, CMS must also comply with regulations and standards promulgated by the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, and these NIST standards require CMS to balance security considerations with operational requirements. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Chao, once the key pieces of HealthCare.gov website is the data hub. Is this a large repository of personal information, as some of my friends on the other side have claimed? Yes or no?
No.
Say that again. No?
No, it does not
Okay,
store
I want that on the record and clearly heard. Does the data hub retain any personal information at all? Yes or no?
No.
Indeed, is it fair to say that the data hub is a tool to transmit eligibility information to federal agencies? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, did the data hub pass a security test to the October 1 launch of HealthCare.gov? Yes or no?
Yes.
Is the data hub working as intended today? Yes or no?
Yes.
Is there any evidence to the contrary?
No.
Is there any evidence of breaches or lack of security of personal data or information by any person who has submitted such data to this undertaking? Yes or no?
No.
It is always our duty to remember how our healthcare system operated prior to the passage of ACA. At that time, insurance companies were allowed to medically underwrite people to determine their premium. This required lengthy, confusing applications and contained a lot of personal medical information. Oftentimes, this was submitted electronically as well. ACA has changed all of this. Now, in fact, and this is a question to you again, Mr. Chao. In fact, application forms on HealthCare.gov do not require the submission of any personal health information. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Chao, that's because ACA prohibits discrimination on the basis of pre-existing conditions and outlaws charging people more because they are sick. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the information is not necessary.
It's not.
And it's not corrected. And it's not collected.
It's not collected.
All right. This is a remarkable improvement over the old system in terms of both security and the quality of care. Next question. There are a lot of negative stories in the press that create a lot of confusion. So I want to get this record straight. Is HealthCare.gov safe and secure for my constituents to use today with regard to protection of their personal information and their privacy? Yes or no?
Yes.
Is there any evidence at all to the contrary?
No.
Mr. Chairman, you have been most gracious. I yield you back 12 seconds.
Thank you. Now going to recognize Ms. Blackburn. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chao, we really appreciate that you would come and work with us on this issue. I want to talk with you for a minute about some red flags that seem to be apparent to you, and you're going to find the email I'm referencing, tab 7, and it is the July 16th, 2013 email that you sent to Monique Outerbridge. And I really want to focus there. You know, when you have something that is running off the rails, and as this obviously seemed to you to be doing, it was a project that just was not proceeding as it should be proceeding, and you express these concerns about the performance of CGI. What I'd like to hear from you is just an articulation of maybe what were those top 3 or 4 red flags that seemed to be going up to you that you said, I fear that the plane is going to crash on takeoff, and some of those wordings that we have heard from you now. So give me just kind of the top 3 or 4 things.
I think in the context of this email, it was at a time period in which we were getting ready to roll out what we called light account, which was that initial registration process. And as I mentioned before, I'm a person who has a lot of anxiety, and I always err on the side of caution if we're going to run out of time. So I occasionally get a little passionate in my emails to remind people that they need to move fast, and if they're moving fast, they need to move faster. That's just the way I operate and the way I direct staff and contractors. And what I was afraid of was, at this particular point in time, was that we were falling behind in the rollout of light account.
Okay, on light account, did your test on that go off without a hitch, or what happened?
There, I don't exactly remember the specifics about what test passed or failed. I just was afraid that we were in jeopardy of missing the date. So therefore, you know, I at that time period, starting in July, I wrote lots of emails to try to.
Did you hit the date?
I believe it took extra 4 days.
An extra 4 days.
Yes.
On the test, and you don't remember exactly what the concerns were that came to you at that point in time. Is there a memo of review, a memo and an articulation of what transpired in that test process?
I don't think it's necessarily a memo. I think the way we operate is that we have daily meetings.
Are there minutes from those meetings, and could you submit those to us for the record?
I don't believe that there were minutes. I believe they were just status check-ins with contractors and their.
Are there notes? Informal
no,
notes?
I don't believe so. I think when my emails were submitted as evidence.
Okay.
That's kind of a.
All right. Let me go on a minute. I want to talk specifically about CGI. What about, if you all kind of informally worked in a group and didn't have formal meetings or minutes and memos and things of that nature, just give me your impression. What was it, your perception, that caused you to lose confidence in CGI? Where were you on that? Because I think it's so interesting. You mentioned price. And I note in this email chain from Monique Outerbridge that they had $40 million already that they had taken. They were coming back and asking for another $38 million. Now, if I had someone who had used up all of their money from a project and then they came back and asked for that much more, I think I would have to say, wait a minute. So regardless, obviously the price to you was of tremendous concern. Am I right on that?
Correct.
Okay. So they had already kind of lost your confidence there. What else was it in their conduct that eroded your confidence in their ability to transact this portion of business?
I think what I was trying to say is that relatively speaking to I would say most project managers that are looking at smaller scale projects, I would say there might be some room to be a little more confident, but given the task at hand, my confidence level had to deal with the enormous amount of activities we had to be successful at to deliver, on light account, that interim, kind of piece, as well as the October 1st delivery.
I yell back.
Yeah, I'm just curious to follow up to that. Did you ever present these concerns that you had about being ready, whether or not it would be ready October 1, when you were interviewed by McKinsey people?
Well, this was in a July timeframe. I think McKinsey was their interviews were in maybe March or April timeframe.
I just wonder if you presented any concerns to them about being able to meet these dates when you spoke with them.
I think as a course of conducting project management, program management, that working with CGI and QSSI and my team, we discussed these concerns on an ongoing basis.
Just one note. I'll follow up.
Okay.
We'll make sure someone follows up. No. Recognize Mr. Waxman. Oh, there we are, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nobody's happy with this rollout of the HealthCare.gov and the administration. It's taken its lumps. But aside from lessons learned, it seems to me my focus ought to be, and my concern, is getting this thing working. Americans want to be able to access the website and choose a health care plan, especially those who haven't been able to get an opportunity to buy health insurance in the past. That's why it seems to me if we need legislative changes, we should make changes to make it work, not to repeal it. You know, the Republicans are so fixated on hating this law, and they want to repeal it, they don't even want to consider helping make it work. And that's the focus that I want to use in asking you some questions, Mr. Chao. How do we make this work better? Now, is it accurate to say that CMS is getting the website up and running?
Yes.
Okay. And is it accurate that CMS has crossed Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that's the department, part of HHS that's working at it, they've crossed 200 items off its punch list?
Correct.
And can you give me a few examples of important issues that have recently been addressed?
Issues related to the enrollment transactions that had some data issues, data quality issues that were fixed, and now issuers can receive that data without doing a lot of cleaning up of that data. So data quality is improved. The daily transactions that we send to them have improved. The response times for the website have improved. The error rate of people experiencing some level of difficulty with moving from stage to stage in their online application, that has been reduced and improved.
Well, in fact, Jeff Zients, the administration's point person on this whole website, announced on Friday that you've dropped your error rate from 6% to below 1%. And you've cut the average wait time for page loading from 8 seconds to less than 1 second. What do these improvements look like to the average consumer going on the site?
I think they become transparent to the user. The user then can get at the task at hand of filling out their information, finding out if they are asking for a premium tax credit, that they are calculated timely, and they are proceeding ahead in the application so that they can apply some, all, or none of that premium tax credit to their plan compare, so that they can look at the offsets that occur and what the final premium should be, to make their selection and to go through the process in a very efficient and speedy fashion as compared to what they experienced on day one.
How about the overall stability of the site? It was down frequently in the early weeks. Has that improved?
Yes, certainly. I think we do have regular maintenance windows, but those maintenance windows are used to implement these improvements that you've been hearing about.
So numbers seem to be getting better, and I expect we'll see more improvements. The anecdotal evidence I get is that the site is getting better, slowly but surely. And that explains why the enrollment rate in November is speeding up significantly. In fact, I do have more than anecdotes. I have some figures. You know, in Massachusetts, when they started a similar program, it started off slowly. Only 0.3% overall enrollees for private coverage signed up in the first month. And then thus far, in the Affordable Care Act, 1.5%. So both started slowly. We're even ahead of what Massachusetts was. But after that, there was a surge in enrollment as people got closer to deadlines. The LA Times reported that, quote, a number of states that use their own systems are on track to hit enrollment targets for 2014 because of a sharp increase in November. California, which enrolled 31,000 people in private plans last month, nearly doubled that in the first 2 weeks of this month, and several other states are outpacing their enrollment estimates. In Minnesota, enrollment in the second half of October was triple the rate of the first half. So we see an acceleration even in the federal marketplace. The New York Times reported that the federal marketplace has nearly doubled its private plan enrollment in just the first 2 weeks of November. We're not where we need to be, but we're seeing improvements. And this increased pace of people going back on the site successfully is, to me, very encouraging. So rather than just attack the health care law and look for ways to undermine it, we ought to try to make it work. And we're anxious to make sure that you do your job of getting the website and all of that working. And if we need any legislative change, call on us, because we're ready, willing, and able to act in that regard. Yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time's expired. Now recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Mr. Chao, for being here. In response to one of Dr. Murphy's questions about a breach in the system, you responded that you could not talk about it in open session, that it would require a classified briefing. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
That's how I was instructed by our department.
Very well. I would like to go on the record as asking that classified briefing with staff, bipartisan staff, occur. Can I get your commitment on trying to make that happen?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So the much talked about red team discussion document from the Washington Post this morning, which of course you have not seen, and I appreciate that. But you were interviewed, in response to Mr. Barton's question, you were interviewed by the McKinsey team who were developing this?
Yes.
Do you remember when?
Approximately April timeframe.
During the time frame that this was being developed. Do you recall what you talked about?
I think primarily what I was intimating to the McKinsey team was a schedule challenge. Because during April we had just started QHP submission and working with issuers. They were very nervous that...
Excuse me, what is QHP?
Qualified health plans.
Okay.
I apologize. And during that month, it was a rapid process to collect all of the qualified health plan data that you see in Plan Compare on HealthCare.gov now, as well as in the state-based marketplaces. And I was remarking on how that's unprecedented to only give issuers, that short amount of time to submit their data, and that we needed to make adjustments in the windows potentially so that they can come back in and make corrections. That's an example of what I talked about in terms of the schedule challenges, that we were trying to undertake something large scale, fairly complex compared to what's happening in the insurance landscape today, and that this was new, and we were working on a short time frame.
And I will stipulate that those are legitimate concerns. And so on page 1 of this red team document, at the bottom of the page highlighted, the working group determined that extending the go-live date should not be part of the analysis, and therefore work with a boundary condition of October 1st as the launch date. In other words, it didn't matter what the conditions on the ground were. Come hell or high water, October 1st, we got to go live. And were you given that impression by anyone on your team as you worked through this?
Not necessarily characterized that way, but as I mentioned...
Well, let me interrupt you again. My time is limited. Who would have made a decision like that? that it doesn't matter. I mean, it's like the old saying, it doesn't matter what, don't check the weather, we're flying anyway. Who would make a decision like that?
I think the decision ultimately is made, by Marilyn Tavner and a team of folks, I suppose, that she works with. But as the administrator, she sets the deadlines for my work. And
now, some of the people that are referenced in the report given to the committee by McKinsey, that people that had discussions in the White House, the old executive office building, people like Nancy Ann DeParle, Jeannie Lambrou, do you know if they were involved in these decisions?
I can't speak to that. I didn't hear anything about those discussions.
Have you been in meetings with Jeannie Lambrou and Nancy Ann DeParle?
Yes.
And could you characterize those meetings?
The ones that I remember were dealing with coordination with IRS on their FTI, Federal Tax Information Requirements, security protections, and the Privacy Act with SSA.
At any point during those meetings, did it come up with the concern that we may not be ready trying to integrate all of these moving parts by October 1st?
Not in that context, no.
In any context?
Concerns about whether if agencies were working closely together, but not really in the context of October 1st.
One of the other things that keeps coming up and repeatedly in this report is that, number one, there's going to be, there were evolving requirements. There wasn't a consistent endpoint. There were multiple definitions of success. And in spite of all of the concerns brought up by the report, it must launch at full volume. I mean, it almost sounds like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it? You're changing the definition as it goes along. You are not allowed to change the date, and you got to launch at full volume. That's a pretty tall order, isn't it?
It is.
Well, let me ask you this. How does it make you feel to know that there was this kind of report out there and that other people knew about it, people in the White House, people within the agency, and you've been the primary point man out there and no one discussed it with you? How does that make you feel?
I'm actually not terribly hurt by it or surprised by it. I think the information contained within it is something that I live on a day-to-day basis to try to deliver a working system.
You're playing into everyone's worst fear about what it's like to be in the bureaucracy. Let me ask you this. One of the things brought up in this report is that there is not a single implementation leader. Do you feel during your time that there has been a single implementation leader that you could look to for advice and direction through this?
I think I'd look to several because of how...
Name one.
We don't have time expired, but we're going to need to follow up with that. So we'll submit those questions for the record, too. Now I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like all of us, I have some concern. I have some questions in a minute about the HealthCare.gov. But I wanted to just say that, it is frustrating for those of us on this side of the aisle who supported it, who actually worked a lot of times on the drafting of different versions of the Affordable Care Act to see what happened on October 1st without the rollout. And to have it successful, that's the way we need to deal with it. Because having been here through also the prescription drug plan for seniors, that's the way you can get to the numbers you really need. So hopefully that'll happen. But the law is still there. And last Saturday in our district, at least in Houston, because in Texas we are unfortunate, we have some of the highest percentage and numbers of uninsured folks in the country. And in our congressional district, 42% of my constituents work and don't have insurance through their employer. So they would be qualified to go to the ACA. And we actually did it by paper. Now, I have to admit, I can't remember, and I wasn't around when Medicare was rolled out. I guess that was the last time we rolled anybody by paper. But let me give you the results. We had 3 members of Congress, the mayor of Houston, our Republican county judge, and the Secretary of Labor. We actually had 800 families show up on a Saturday morning and signed in, of course, with multiple attendees per family. Nearly 300 people set up follow-up appointments after a navigator. We had 88 of the certified navigators there, and we don't know how many applications were completed because the number is still being tallied by navigators and HHS and our regional office out of Dallas. So there are people out there who want to do it, and if we have to do it by paper, we will do it. But that's the frustration we have. We want this to work because there are millions of people in our country who need this. Now, I know the majority in the House may not understand that, but I know in our district they do. But I don't know if you have a comment, but then I can get to the HealthCare.gov.
I think CMS takes to heart the matter, and I think everyone working on this is absolutely serious about improving this experience, because we know that in districts like yours there are quite a few number of people that need and want to enroll and use this benefit. So we are certainly working very hard to make that happen.
Well, with that success, believe me, we're going to do a lot of smaller ones in our district and try and work with them and partner with media companies to maybe get the message out. I have a few questions about HealthCare.gov and the important goal I think we both share, ensuring as part of the success and implementation of the Affordable Care Act, people can access the care they need and when they need it. Part of this goal requires the federal and state exchanges secure the American people can trust their information and privacy won't be compromised. How is the data hub used to determine eligibility and enroll applicants and process appeals different from the data systems used by other agencies, federal agencies, such as Social Security or the IRS?
How is the data hub different
than the other agencies who obviously have up and running ways where Social Security and even IRS you can file?
I think what makes it different is that, for example, SSA is the eligibility agency for Medicare. So every night, SSA's field offices load data about accretions and deletions into the Medicare program, and we receive a very large file from them every night that we process for 2 to 3 hours to update all of our systems so that providers can see new Medicare beneficiaries accreting into the system. That's lots of data moving between two organizations, and it's stored, and it is time intensive. The Data Services Hub goes out, and for a requester of that data, a valid requester, it reads the data where the source is, transfers it back to the requester in a secure fashion, does not remember the contents of that data, and facilitates that without moving massive, millions of records of data all at once, all the time, every day. It only transfers enough data to get the job done.
Were you at the HHS when we've gone through to Medicare enrolling by internet? I mean, when we shifted from having to go into a Social Security office and fill out the paperwork, you can do it online now.
Yes, yes.
And I assume there were some glitches when that first started.
Yes.
Well, and of course we didn't have a deadline and a rollout and things like that. It was built in over the time, so you had time to problem solve. And
right.
Our problem is we don't have that time to problem solve here in later November.
I still remember in the mid-'90s, SSA put up the electronic benefit statement, and after a few months, they had to take it down, and it didn't come back up until years later, until they perfected it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you having this hearing, and Mr. Chao, appreciate you coming to testify before the committee. We've had a number of hearings like this over the last few months, trying to find out first how the rollout was going to work, and of course we've gotten testimony time and time again from the administration that the rollout was going to be fine, and then I think what's most frustrating is that when this report came out, this McKinsey report that really chronicles the problems that were happening months ago, back in March and April, at the same time that administration officials were telling us that everything was going to be fine, and to that end telling American families that everything was going to be fine when October 1st hit. I guess there are many things about this that trouble me, but first, when I look at this, you say you hadn't seen this report, and I've read through a number of these items that McKinsey pointed out in the report that they were telling to somebody in CMS, around you, over you, under you, somewhere. But these are things that should have been just basic testing requirements. I used to write software. I actually wrote test plans for software rollouts, and in fact, many of these are just basic common sense things you do. I mean, if we made one line of code change, we literally would test that over and over in multiple ways, let alone major changes. What this report talks about is chaos at CMS. Nobody's in charge. They talk about the fact that you had multiple people that were making multiple changes and major design changes to the system just weeks prior to testing. I mean, prior to the rollout without testing it. I mean, did you have a test plan? Whether or not you read this report, these are things that you should have been doing anyway. I mean, were y'all making changes, big changes all the way through, and were you testing any of those changes, or just say, well, you know, they told us October 1st, roll it out no matter what?
You've asked a lot of questions in there.
Yeah.
So let me try to recall how to address them. I think that certainly, yes. If you had this experience in software development, you need to have solid requirements before you can actually have good test cases in which to actually run tests. I think it's a dynamically changing environment of which, if we had more time, and that time would have been devoted to solidifying requirements that are translated from policy.
You had 3 years. I mean, there were 3 years. This isn't something that just kind of got plopped on your desk. I mean, the law passed and was signed into law in 2010. There was a lot of time to prepare for it. The requirements, major requirements, were changing weeks before, some of them for political reasons, by the Obama administration. So you can't just say, well, you know, we just didn't have enough time. I mean, somebody in CMS, and if it wasn't you, it was maybe Ms. Tavenner, who knows who it was, but somebody was making all these changes and saying, gee whiz, I mean, you know, let's make big changes and don't test it because we just want to roll this thing out no matter what.
Well, having written software or written test cases, you know that the requirements come from the business side or the policy side, and they're subject to change based upon how your customer or your business.
The law didn't change. The law was passed. And for 3 years, that law didn't change. The law was there. You knew what those requirements were. If you make changes in the requirements, you also ought to make changes in your test plan.
The law is a very high-level expression of requirements that certainly you can't develop code or test cases from. There needs to be a significant amount of translation into lower-level details. And that's what I mean by a scheduled challenge, is that we have to receive those requirements and translate them into test cases, test data, to exercise the system and as well as build the system too. So.
Now, look, they talk in this report that the contractor received absolutely conflicting direction between the various entities within CMS. Conflicting directions within CMS. That's not, a requirement change. That's one person saying do this and another person in the same agency saying do something different. And by the way, none of that's being tested in the meantime. That's not evolving requirements. That's chaos within the Obama administration, where they're literally changing things and multiple people are changing them and nobody's talking to anybody.
Well, I can't speak to how they characterized it, but I think that in CMS we have Medicaid and CHIP requirements, we have insurance exchange requirements, oversight requirements, medical loss ratio, rate review, early retiree reinsurance.
And I know y'all have all that. Look,
there's lots of
you've got jobs. The bottom line is, you know, this report lays out the chaos that was going on, but all of this information was known within the White House. Reports were being briefed to people in the White House, and either President Obama didn't know about it, in which case people directly under him knew that this thing was going to be a disaster and just didn't tell him, or the president did know about it and went out misleading people anyway. But either way, if the president really didn't know about this, this report says the White House absolutely knew what was going on, and they didn't tell the president. He ought to be firing these people today. If a CEO went out there and said, I'm rolling out this project, this would be just like buying a TV on Amazon. That's what the president said. And if somebody right underneath him knew that it wasn't going to be like that, and this report says absolutely they knew, and they didn't tell the president, he ought to go and fire every single one of those people right now and hold them accountable. Or maybe that just says that he did know about it. And we'll see what the president says, but this report's damning. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Time's expired. Can you just clarify an answer you gave to the gentleman here? I thought you said something like, with more time, you would have done more testing or something along those lines. Are you saying you would have liked to have more time?
No, I think that's what I mean by there's a scheduled challenge, is that you're trying to maximize the time that you have left as you're trying to extract the requirements from the policy that's being finalized. The longer policy takes to be finalized, the longer it takes to translate.
You wish you would have had more time to test it?
I think that's true of every project I've ever worked on.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Yarmouth for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chao, for your testimony today. I just want to follow up a little bit on Mr. Scalise's line of questioning, the issue of whether or not you had 3 years to prepare for this, when was the deadline for states to decide whether they were doing their own exchanges or were going to participate in the federal exchange?
I think the time frame was the end of 2012.
End of 2012. So January 1st, essentially, of this past year. And when was the deadline for states to decide whether they were going to enter into a partnership with the federal government?
I believe it was the end of April of 2013.
So really, the department did, or CMS did not have 3 years to prepare, and there was probably no way to guess 3 years ago that only 14 states in the District of Columbia were going to set up their own exchanges. Wasn't the anticipation that far more states would do their own exchanges?
Yes, we were hoping so.
So it really wasn't until this year that CMS really understood the magnitude of the volume of work that the website was going to have to accommodate.
Correct. It's not such a clear binary decision. You do or you don't. There's still coordination that has to occur in either way.
Thank you for that. Now, obviously, when we're talking about security, we're talking about two separate issues. One is the vulnerability of the system to some kind of outside attack. I don't know why anyone would really want to attack the federal exchange, but assuming that is an issue. The second one is the average citizen's concern about information that is there about them. And I think that's one thing we're most interested here. Mr. Dingle actually asked you directly about the fact that there really isn't very much information on the website that would be considered a private in nature. And I guess the question I would ask is, are people who are working with the exchange now subject to or vulnerable to a breach of their privacy than they were under the prior system when the insurance companies had pages and pages and pages of health information, including every doctor they had ever visited, every prescription they had ever taken, every medical procedure they had undergone over a certain period of time? Would you say that there was much more vulnerability under that system than there would be in the federal exchange?
Much more so, because so much more personal information, including health information, was involved in that process.
And I think during the course of questioning, we've actually done a pretty good job of debunking the issue as to whether there really was a security problem here. There's no evidence that there has been, and I think there really hasn't been any evidence presented that would make us doubt that. So I'm glad about that, and I think that should encourage Americans to participate more actively. And since one other thing that's come up, and it involves the question of 80%, and it's something I wanted to clarify because the press reports have been that the administration has set as a metric that 80% will be able to get on the site and smoothly sign up, enroll for health coverage as of the end of this month. That doesn't mean that the remaining 20% won't be able to access affordable quality health insurance, is it?
No, I can't speak to the exact percentages, but I think there is a recognition that some people, whether it be HealthCare.gov or any system, for example, if you walked into an SSA field office, how many people can actually get their business done in one visit as compared to the greater majority of people? I think some people need extra help. They need assistance to navigate the process. And I think that's probably what they were referring to.
Thank you very much for that. And I just want to do some shameless self-promotion for my state right now. As of last Friday, Kentucky obviously operating its own exchange. 48,000 Kentuckians are enrolled in new health insurance. 41% of them are under the age of 35. Over 452,000 visitors have gone to the website. 380,000 people have conducted preliminary screenings to find out if they're eligible for coverage. And I think most importantly, maybe over almost 1,000 businesses have actually begun the process of signing up for new coverage for their employees. And over 300 have actually been enrolled and have been qualified now to offer coverage. So Kentucky's doing well, and I hope the federal exchange will do just as well. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Harper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chao, thank you for your time here today. And you replied earlier on a follow-up question that the Chairman had. I believe you said you would like to have had more time for the testing. Did you request more time from anyone?
No.
And can you tell me why you did not request more time?
Because I was given a target of October 1st and various other delivery dates of which I had to stay on schedule for.
Did you believe it was ready for October 1st?
I believe we did everything we could to make sure that the right priorities were set so that we could deliver a system on October 1st.
And do you believe the system was delivered on October 1st?
It was.
Do you believe
it wasn't performing as well as we liked and certainly had more glitches than we anticipated, but we did deliver a system on October 1st.
Do you think glitches is the proper word to use to describe the rollout?
I think there are problems. There are defects. If you know, glitches is just a word that's commonly used right now.
Well, glitches doesn't seem to convey how serious the failure of the rollout has been, and so here we are. And of course, one of the big concerns that we have is what do you do about making sure that personally identifiable information for those who sign up is protected. And on the report that you have there on page 11, if I could get you to take a look at that real quick on the McKinsey report. At the bottom of page 11, it says, and of course at the top it says options that could be implemented to help mitigate key risk. At the bottom it says name a single implementation leader and implement associated governance process. Has there been a single implementation leader named?
I don't think that's the way it's been characterized before, but I think Marilyn Tavener, our administrator, certainly has accepted accountability, and she does run the agency in this process.
Certainly, but that's not saying that she is supposed to be the single implementation leader there. Is that how you read that report?
But again, I didn't see this until just this very minute, so...
I spent some time here while we were waiting on time to question here. I went to the HealthCare.gov site, and it took a little while to try to figure out how on the search to get to the information on how you protect yourself from fraud in the health insurance marketplace. And if you, and it takes a couple of steps to get to this information, so people probably more sophisticated than I am on this would need to be tracking this. But if you look at it on the site, it says how to report suspected fraud. And it said you can report suspected fraud in one of two ways, and it lists a breakdown of one way, which is to use the Federal Trade Commission's online complaint assistant. And I tried that a moment ago, and it was not very successful. It says you can call your local police department. And then it says you can visit a site, the Federal Trade Commission, to learn more about identity theft. And the second choice is to call the Health Insurance Marketplace call center, and it gives that number. So if you were the victim of personally identifiable information being fraudulently released or obtained, who would you call first under that scenario?
The listed call center number, the Marketplace call center.
And it's
if you're in a federally facilitated market.
Okay, and it says, explain what happened and your information will be handled appropriately. How do you define handled appropriately? What is that? How do you get someone's identity back once it's been compromised or there's been an identity theft?
Well, I think there needs to be some analysis and collection of information to make sure what type of situation occurred and then make a decision going forward there.
Well, obviously this is a critical matter, so some determination made. What's the time frame? How quickly can someone's life be put back together if this were to happen?
I think it's situationally dependent, and I really can't. I'm not comfortable giving an answer right off.
You had said earlier that steps were being taken to prevent unauthorized access to the sites. What about those who may have authorized access but release it in an unauthorized manner? What protections or safeguards put in there, particularly for those that are the navigators and the situation that There's been no background check unless it was required in a state. How is that being handled with the use of navigators?
I think the premise is that when we issue, for example, a grant to a navigator organization, or we sign a computer matching agreement with a state, that there are rules of behavior and certain kind of requirements that are associated with signing that agreement or receiving that grant.
Do you have a central reporting location of the navigators that are in violation or reported in violation?
I have to check on that.
My time. If you let us know, my time's expired.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. Mr. Chao, you were just presented with a whole series of hypotheticals. Have any of those hypotheticals happened?
No, not to our knowledge, no.
I appreciate that. And I would suggest, Mr. Chao, if someone was maliciously using information in a way that they were not allowed to use it, would that be a crime?
Can you repeat that question again?
If someone hacked into the website and was using information in a way that they weren't allowed to use it, so in any way, wouldn't that be considered a crime?
Certainly, yes.
And I believe that we could fully prosecute those individuals?
Yes.
And I would hope that this committee would fully support and encourage the Department of Justice to go and fully prosecute anyone that's hacking this website. Mr. Chairman, it wasn't too long ago that there was a hearing that this committee had on Lifeline. And there was some of my Republican colleagues were encouraging members, citizens of the United States, to go to visit Obamaphone.net to sign up for a Lifeline or to get information from the website as to the accuracy of what the program was about. An hour later, the website was taken down, and this committee, myself and Congresswoman Eshoo, asked the FTC to look into the matter, but they said it appears that in the fraudulent way that this data was being collected, that the website is now down. I think we as members of Congress need to be careful with how we're purporting information out to the American people. We need to be careful about this. There's not, again, a member on this committee that doesn't believe that we should get the website working, that we need to get to the facts of what's happening. And with that being said, Mr. Chao, I guess two things, Mr. Chairman. There's a GAO report that was published on April 24th of 2012 entitled Cybersecurity Threats Impacting the Nation. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert it to the record. The report, and I'd invite everyone in the committee to take a look at this, it was to the Homeland Security Department or committee talking about the threats that our nation is facing. The intelligence community, Homeland Security, the White House, members of Congress websites that have been hacked into. We need to do more in this area to make sure that we're keeping information secure. But with that being said, Mr. Chao, this has been talked about a bit, but on the front page of the Washington Post this morning, there was an article about a document that was leaked to the paper by the committee majority. The article describes an analysis conducted in 2013 by McKinsey & Company that identified potential risks in the development of HealthCare.gov. The report foreshadowed some of the problems that we now face today. Mr. Chao, did you see the report at the time it was published in March and April of 2013?
No, I did not.
So is it fair to say that you are not the best person to comment on why the report was done and how CMS and HHS responded to its findings?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I raise this because it illustrates a number of problems with how this has been handled. In particular, the perception that's created when you withhold documents from the Democrats on the committee and when you play gotcha games by leaking material to the press without context, it makes it appear that you're more interested in running a partisan investigation than in finding the facts. And I certainly hope that that's not the case and believe that not to be true. But we need to work together to get to the bottom of this. So with that being said, Mr. Chao, what efforts is the Department of Health and Human Services undertaking to address the ongoing threats?
We listed as part of our mitigation strategy daily and weekly security testing and scans, which is something we always do, but in this case, we do it more frequently because we understand the sensitive nature of HealthCare.gov and the trust that and confidence we have to obtain from people to come and use the site.
And how is the department coordinating with other federal agencies who maintain websites that also gather personal information?
I think we work with all of our key partners that are connected to the hub to make sure that We function under what we call a harmonized privacy and security framework, and along with the states have a process and a program in place to handle certain situations in which there are incidents that need to be managed about potential data breaches. So we have a program, we have a policy, we have a set of operational procedures in place, work and coordinating across all these agencies.
And does that include, Mr. Chao, the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security?
Yes.
Very good. So with that, Mr. Chairman, as I yield back my time, I just hope that it's clear, Mr. Chao, to you, to the President, that we're not happy with the rollout right now. We need to get this working. There's too many vulnerable Americans that need access to care, and we need to make sure that we can get them that coverage. In the same way, protect the information. But I think it is a big step forward that no longer will individuals have to report the kind of illnesses or accidents that they've had in their past so that they can get care in the future. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and without objection, the gentleman's document will be admitted to the record. Now, Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chao, for your time before the committee today. Last week, the President met with several representatives of the insurance industry to discuss solutions that may be possible in light of the HealthCare.gov debacle. Have you had any conversations about changes you can make to HealthCare.gov to assist the insurance industry?
I think part of the strategy, I haven't spoken to the issuers myself or been part of those meetings, but I think that as part of the strategy under Jeff Zients is to improve the experience of consumers, but that involves key third parties that are also key to this equation of getting enrolled, and those are agents and brokers, and working with issuers to fix certain aspects of the systems to make it work better.
So have you had any discussions then about providing insurance companies with the ability to directly enroll, or anybody in your agency department?
We had designed something called direct enrollment into HealthCare.gov, or part of that FFM system architecture to accommodate that.
And so that's ready. That feature has been turned on, or it has not been turned on?
It was not working well initially, like many other things, but we have been performing fixes and optimizing it and working with issuers to get direct enrollment up.
So have you had any discussions about giving insurers direct access to information on eligibility for subsidies?
Only in terms of the result. There is a series of security
yes.
handoffs. Right?
That's a yes, then?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Do you, going back to the question then about the feature on the website, will that happen in the future then, to that question? Discussions about giving insurers direct access to information on eligibility for subsidies, do you believe that will happen in the future?
It's not really direct access. It's more of a handoff, a secure handoff in which they've collected enough information about the applicant and their, or an agent and broker, and this person has given authorization for consent to work with them as a third party.
So it's a yes then again as well?
It's not access direct to eligibility data. It is a more involved process that protects the person's information.
But they'll be getting the insurance company will be getting the subsidy access.
They don't get to calculate it. That is a marketplace function.
But they'll have information on eligibility for the subsidies. Direct access.
Only as a result of the marketplace handling that data, not touching that eligibility data themselves.
When the committee's been reviewing materials, it indicates that some parts of HealthCare.gov were not completed before the launch, as we've discussed here. What portion or percentage of the website remained to be created when you launched on October 1st?
I don't have an exact percentage. I think some of previous conversations when people ask about whether things were complete, I look at it in terms of overall marketplace systems.
So you've never talked about what's complete, what's not complete, whether it's how much to go?
I think there was a set of priority functions that needed to be in place. Like, for example, you had to authenticate an individual. That's a key function that had to.
Well, how much do we have to build today still? I mean, what do we need to build? 50%, 40%, 30%?
I think it's just an approximation. We're probably sitting somewhere between 60 and 70% because we still have to build the system.
60 or 70% that needs to be built still?
Because we still have to build the payment systems to make payments to issuers in January.
Let me get this correct. 60 to 70% of HealthCare.gov still needs to be built.
It's not really HealthCare.gov. It's the federally facilitated marketplace.
But the entire system that the American people are being required to rely upon,
that part is there.
70%.
HealthCare.gov, the online application, verification, determination, plan compare, getting enrolled, generating an enrollment transaction, that's 100% there. What I'm talking
about the entire system is 60 to 70% away from being complete.
Yeah, there's the back office systems, the accounting systems, the payment systems. They still need to be.
How of those 60 to 70% of systems that are still being built, how are they going to be tested?
You mean the remaining 30 to 40%? How are they going to be tested?
Yes.
In the same exact manner we tested everything else.
Is it difficult to review the new parts of the website while it's operating?
It won't affect the front end, the front part.
But that's pretty difficult, isn't it?
Excuse me?
It's pretty difficult to review it while it's in operation, correct?
No, it doesn't involve the front part.
Right, but where it's operating within.
When we're trying to calculate a payment, derive a payment, do data matches on the back end, that doesn't affect the HealthCare.gov operations.
How long will you have to test those parts that you're building?
They're on an ongoing basis. Depends on their build schedule.
So is it appropriate, given the performance of HealthCare.gov where we're at right now, to launch any new applications or features without testing them heavily before they go live?
We are testing.
Mr. Chairman, I have several other questions, and we'll follow up with you, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Welsh for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the hearing. There is a mutual desire to get this thing to work, and there's really two models that we can use to deal with the failed rollout. One is to fix it, and the other is to use it as fodder to relitigate the battle about whether health care is the law of the land. And my hope is that we're past that. There's an absolute urgency to make things work, and I know, Mr. Chao, that's your job. And I just want to put this into context. We had a big battle in this Congress. I was not here over the passage of Medicare Part D. It was a largely partisan vote. The Republicans under George Bush were for it. Most of the Democrats were against it. But it passed in a very close, tense vote. And my understanding is that as it then went into the implementation phase, which required a computer program and a website, there were lots of significant difficulties with that program. And there were concerns about having it work. And I just want to ask you a little bit about that history so that we have a context for the challenges we have today. Not at all as an excuse, because there's real unity about needing to get this fixed. But is the actions we take, are the actions we take about getting it fixed or about trying to derail and scuttle the overall health care program? America's going to have to judge. But can you give us a sense what was going on inside the agency when you were preparing the Medicare Part D website in 2005, and were there concerns and issues that needed to be addressed then?
The biggest and most prominent example that I can recall was the concern around auto assignment and auto enrolling Medicaid full benefit dual eligibles to receive a Part D prescription drug benefit and switching them over as of January 1st. And that we had sent these enrollment files out to the plans, the health plans, or Part D sponsors around November. And in December, it was some realization, last minute realization that pharmacists and pharmacies who are on the front line of helping these beneficiaries required, some access to information to help them navigate this new change. So as an example, we scrambled and we developed a method for pharmacies to actually get access through authorizations to Medicare enrollment data for the dual eligibles that were enrolled, so that at point of sale they can at least do things such as 3-day fills,
right,
just to figure out what plan they might be in. And that's just an example I recall that was a mass scramble time crunch, had to get it in place. Lots of working around the clock, lots of urgency, pushing many people, not just on the contractor and the staff side, but working with the prescription drug industry as a whole, including pharmacists, to make this happen.
All right. And those problems continued even after the January 1 rollout date, my understanding.
Correct, because it's not perfected. It's not so much a technical issue. When you introduce a new business process, for example, in procedures, in an administrative aspect of healthcare, it takes a while for people to actually understand how that works, as compared to learning the data system that's involved to support that business process. So it's more than just a technical issue.
Okay. And is it your view that as we ultimately succeeded with Part D, we can ultimately succeed in terms of the technical website issues with HealthCare.gov?
Certainly. I think it comes with being focused and driven to get at the root of the problem and to fix the systems, because on the technical issue side, it is solvable, very solvable, and we've shown that it's made improvements.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognized for 5 minutes. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, speaking of Medicare Part D, no one was required by law or force of penalty to subscribe to that. Isn't that correct?
No, but we did auto-assign, auto-enroll Medicaid dual eligibles into Medicare Part D.
But it is a different animal than what we're dealing with now, because a lot of Americans are being told they can't have their insurance, so they're going to have to sign up through the exchanges. So I do appreciate that, but there is a difference. One of the things that when you get a time to take a look at the report, and I think it's a symptom of the problems that this website has had, is that you were not included in the briefings on the report that has come to light in the last 24 hours. But when you get a chance to read that, one of the things you'll see is they thought there ought to be one person overseeing all the different parts. And listening to the vendors who previously testified before this committee, it looked like they were each building their own part, and then in the last month they had to squeeze it all together, and in the last 2 weeks things were changing. Another part of that report shows us that on a timeline, you really want to have you want to define your policy requirements prior to finishing the design and starting the build. Wouldn't you agree with that?
That is the logical thing to do.
It is the logical thing to do, but in reality we've heard testimony in this committee that they were changing policy. We know the big change on July the 2nd, when all of a sudden the employer mandate was allegedly delayed. The President signed an executive order. I'm not sure it has legal authority, but he did that. Delayed that employer mandate. Further, we know from testimony that there were changes being made as close to the launch as 2 weeks before. So based on that, it would be the logical conclusion that you're going to have significant problems, wouldn't it?
With the luxury of hindsight, I can see that there are contributors to the way the system performed when it was unveiled.
Well,
but that's not. I need to focus on fixing this thing.
And I know that your focus is to fix it now, but also when you take a look at it, when you're still defining your policy requirements as late as 2 weeks prior to launch, it's very difficult to design and then to build and then to test a system and have it work, whether it's the security component or the performance component. It would be logical to do it in the proper order. When you do the illogical, you're liable to have problems. I know you would agree with that if you were free to answer honestly. And I would say to you that I also noticed that no one person was ever appointed to head this up, while you were in charge of part of it and you're in charge of making part of it work. It looks like there's at least 6 different representatives from different agencies that had a hand in overseeing what was going on, and no one had control over the others. Isn't that correct?
I think it was a governance committee that was formed.
A governance committee. And isn't that interesting? And sometimes when you're trying to launch a big project like this, though, you have to have one general in charge of the operation. Wouldn't that be logical?
I would say that for the technical pieces, I was responsible for making sure that the technical pieces were organized.
And last month, this committee uncovered a September 27 memorandum indicating that HealthCare.gov launched without a full security control assessment. Administrator Tavener had to attest that she was aware that the launch carried security risks. Can you tell us what those risks are specifically?
First of all, I think the incomplete testing, it was fully security tested through three rounds of testing, so that when Marilyn Tavener signed the authority to operate on September 27th, it had no high findings and had gone through the appropriate security tests.
So you didn't. So what she said was not accurate. That it had did not have a full security control assessment. She was mistaken when she testified in front of us.
I think there's a part of that that sentence that might be that needs clarification. I think what we were trying to say was that the security control assessment was not tested for a full entire system, of which we were still, remember, we're still building financial management aspects of it. I think it was just an acknowledgement that the 100% of the system was not complete at that time.
Okay, and it's still not complete today, and the people of America want to know, what's the security going to be if it's not complete on January 1st?
The October 1st pieces that were necessary, such as ensuring security and privacy for those functions that I mentioned, were tested.
And I appreciate that, but what can we expect on January 1? I apologize, I yield back.
Thank you. And by the way, our prayers are with the family of State Senator Cray in Virginia, who is, I guess, in critical
If I might
condition, right?
take, since you bring it up, if I might take a moment of personal privilege, I do appreciate your prayers. Cree and I were in opposite parties, but just like on this committee, you form friendships, and he served with me in that Virginia House of Delegates before he went on to the Senate and then went on to run for other office. But he's still a sitting senator, and it obviously has shaken everybody in Virginia, and he is a good man, and our prayers are with him, and I encourage everybody to say a prayer for Senator Deeds and his family.
I thank the gentleman. Now to term Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue on that recent questioning of the document that my Republican colleagues have released. Mr. Chao, this document was signed, I believe, on September 27th, and it's an ATO, an authority to operate memorandum to operate the federally facilitated marketplace for 6 months and implement a security mitigation plan. Can you tell us, are ATOs commonly used in federal data systems?
Yes, it is in essence, the last official sign-off to authorize a federal system to go into operations.
Thank you. And can you tell us why Administrator Tavener signed this ATO rather than perhaps other officials that might report to the Administrator?
I think the span of the stakeholders that were involved across the agency we had not had a system that had this unprecedented involvement of so many different components, so that the recommendation by our Chief Information Officer was to make a recommendation for the Administrator to actually sign off on this, because she runs the entire agency.
And the fact that she signed it is good news. It's an indication, I would believe, that officials at the highest level of CMS were briefed on and taking responsibility for site security?
Correct, yes.
Now, as I understand it, this document describes security testing for the HealthCare.gov website. It says that security testing of the marketplace was ongoing since inception and into September 2013. In fact, it says that, and I quote, throughout the 3 rounds of security control assessment testing, all of the security controls have been tested on different versions of the system. Is that correct?
Correct.
But the document goes on to say that because of system readiness, a complete security assessment of all the security controls in one complete version of the system was not performed. It says that this lack of testing, and I quote, exposed a level of uncertainty that can be deemed as a high risk.
I didn't actually. I had recommended as part of that decision memo, and I think at that time, as I mentioned earlier, it's semantics. Not 100% of the system is built, so you can't really consciously say you have it all available in one place to fully test, because not everything was needed for October 1st. Only essential pieces involving HealthCare.gov were tested for security.
So the document then indicated that CMS postponed the final security assessment screening, right? And in its place, CMS did put in place a number of mitigation measures. And it concluded that these measures would mitigate the security risks. I want to take a moment to ask you about the September 27th ATO and how the risks identified are being addressed. Can you describe the recommendations in that September 27th memo?
You mean in terms of mitigations?
Yes.
Okay, so on a daily basis, we run antivirus scans every 3 minutes, malware scans every 3 minutes. Data flow monitoring is a continuous effort. Threat protection analysis against known bad IPs or actors, I mentioned that in my opening remarks, that it's continuous. On a weekly basis, we monitor operating system compliance, infrastructure system compliance. We conduct penetration testing, authenticated and unauthenticated, by marketplace security teams. We have a 24/7 security operations team. We conduct additional penetration testing, authenticated and unauthenticated, by another group of security professionals in CMS that report under our Chief Information Security Officer. We also conduct application software assurance testing, which is occurring biweekly. And on a monthly basis, we produce a plan of actions and milestones that keeps track and reports on any discovered weaknesses during all of this monitoring.
So CMS is taking action that was recommended in the ATO.
Correct.
And do you have confidence in these and other measures you are taking to protect the security of Americans' personal information?
I have high confidence.
Okay. I understand it here, the remedial actions and the ongoing security testing are protecting the security of the website.
Yes.
And so perhaps the message coming from our Republican colleagues is that they do not want the website to work, and that they want to scare people from going on the website when, in fact, we're hearing that security has been provided for.
I think we've gone over and above, because we are very sensitive, and we appreciate the nervousness around this new program with people's information.
Well, we appreciate you building the security of the website and responding to the actions recommended in the ATO memo. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Time's expired. Now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chao, I spent 30 years in information technology. I've been the Chief Information Officer of publicly traded companies, as well as the Director of the CIO staff at U.S. Special Operations Command, and I know the pressures that delivering on a system of this complexity, I know the pressures that are there. I assume that you and I have a common goal here today, and that is to make sure that the American people hear the truth. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct.
Okay. Given that, then, would it be okay if you and I have an understanding, because this is two IT guys talking to one another, if I ask you a question that you don't understand, would you ask me for clarification so that we can get to the bottom of it, because we want to dig down in here into some things that are pertinent?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. You know, under FSMA, agencies operating IT systems are required to establish security baselines, incorporate them into applications and networks, and test them to see that they are incorporated correctly. The use and review of this testing plan is typically known as a security control assessment. Several of the security control assessments for HealthCare.gov were either not completed or otherwise ignored. So are you familiar with the 4 security control assessments that were completed on the various aspects of the federally facilitated marketplaces?
Not in intricate detail, but I think going back to what you said about ignored or missed, I think the most important thing to remember is that on September.
Are you familiar with those security control assessments? Have you seen or read them?
I've read the most important one. That's the one that.
Have you read all 4 of them?
No, not all 4.
Could you turn to tab 4 of the document binder that you have in front of you? This is the security control assessment completed on October 11th, 2013. Are you familiar with the findings of this security control assessment?
Yes.
Okay. You testified a little earlier that it was your opinion, based on what you knew at the time, that the security control assessments, that security had been adequately addressed when Administrator Tabner signed the document authorizing the operation of the website. Is that correct?
Yes.
But yet you just testified that you were not aware and you didn't read the security control assessment. So how can you make that assertion that security had been adequately addressed when you hadn't even read the control assessments yourself?
I am thinking that there might be some mismatch in versions here. Yours says final report October 11th. For Health Insurance Exchange, August through September 2013 SCA report. I have the Federally Facilitated Marketplace Decision Security Report.
Well, I'm talking about the one in your
Excuse me, can we ask
there.
the witness to speak up a little bit? I'm having difficulty hearing him.
I'm sorry.
But I've got to move on because I don't have time to look through the binder. Who develops the scope of a security control assessment before the contractor performs it?
We have independent contractors that design our SCA testing.
Do you need an application like the Data Services Hub or the website to be complete in order to test it for purposes of a security control assessment?
I think that depends on. We don't like testing security.
Well, I can assure you that we don't.
In terms of using live data, so prior to going to production, we tend to conduct security.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's put up a slide. Are you familiar with the term SQL injection?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. SQL injection is a process that hackers use to gain access to SQL databases, relational databases through SQL. This is a screenshot directly off of HealthCare.gov that you see. If you put a semicolon in the search box, you get all of those different breakdowns of SQL injection. Can you give me any idea how vigorous the testing was around SQL injection? And are you aware that users potential hackers have the capability to go in through SQL injection and manipulate these strings?
I can't speak to the exact situation. I think some of the folks that are coming up behind me in the panel might be able to specifically address.
I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, that I still have very serious concerns about the security aspects of this system. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, gentleman's time has expired. Now recognize Mr. Kowski for 5 minutes.
I want to also focus on this particular system, the contractor meter. I'm here, Mr. Chao. Yeah, okay. We've heard this morning, we just heard about the risks that the contractor meter identified when it performed security control assessments for different components of HealthCare.gov. And at first glance, they can seem alarming. But my understanding is that all of these issues were mitigated for the functions on the website that launched on October 1st. It's important to understand the general point of security testing to identify any potential issues so they can be addressed before they become real problems. Asking Meter to perform these assessments gave CMS and the contractors the opportunity to identify and resolve any security vulnerabilities before anyone's personal information could be put at risk. So, Mr. Chao, does that sound to you like an accurate description? Do the security control assessments involve an iterative process where problems are identified and then mitigated?
Yes, that's correctly characterized.
So, Mr. Chao, I want to walk through some of these key security assessments to determine whether the high risks that Meter identified have, in fact, been addressed. In January and February of 2013, Meter performed a security control assessment of EIDM, the account creation function, on HealthCare.gov. According to the final report, Meter identified several high-risk findings. So, Mr. Chao, were these high-risk findings resolved and mitigated before the October 1st start of open enrollment in the federal marketplace?
Yes, they were.
And the fact is that they were noted in the that fact is noted in the Meter report. Okay, so Meter also performed a security control assessment of the Data Services Hub in August 2013, and again identified several high-risk findings. Were these findings resolved and also mitigated before the October 1st launch?
Yes, and the hub received an authority to operate in August.
Yes, and the fact is that fact was noted in the report. I also want to discuss the security control assessment that Meter performed over August and September 2013 for the Health Insurance Exchange. Mr. Chao, were all high risks identified in this assessment mitigated before October 1st?
Yes.
Thank you. And what your answers confirm is that the system worked. Meter identified potentially high security risks, and CMS made sure that they were mitigated before they would become major problems. The Meter reports do not show a flawed system. They show that CMS conducted security control assessments to identify problems and then fix those problems. And I hope that my Republican colleagues will keep these findings in mind when they talk about the security of HealthCare.gov. We don't want to alarm the public about security risks that have already been addressed by CMS and its contractors. It just seems to me that identifying risks that were named, it's important also to note that they were all fixed before the launch on October 1st. And I thank you very much for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back, and now I recognize the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chao, for being with us today. Mr. Chao, I have a question about the subsidies and some questions about some miscalculations that could be happening on the exchange. Press reports have indicated that some subsidies are being miscalculated. In fact, one individual the President identified as a beneficiary of Obamacare now can't afford it. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit an article from CNN to the committee for the report, for the record. This is a single mom, has a teenage son with ADHD, went on the Washington State Exchange, had gotten a insurance quote for what she would pay at a gold price. Then she received notification that it was actually, the quote was actually higher for a silver plan. More confusion went on, then even a cheaper plan at bronze level for $324. So in other words, she ended up paying a lot more. I guess my questioning for you is, is this happening on the HealthCare.gov site or the federal marketplace?
I think there are a lot of inputs to how an advanced premium tax credit is calculated. A person can come back and make some modifications to their income levels, to their household composition. So, and Washington is a state-based marketplace, so I can't really speak to that particular case. But I think that HealthCare.gov allows people the flexibility to try several ways to determine, what their tax credit.
Okay, and there again, I'm just going based off the article. It doesn't seem to be that she had gone back to make any changes. It sounded to me like, there were miscalculations that she was notified of. So again, my questioning is this happening in the Federal Exchange?
I would need some specifics to be able to answer that. Okay. I think that if anyone ever does have issues with believing that their subsidies were incorrectly calculated, they could certainly call our call center to try to find out if it was correct or not.
So that's basically, I'm just asking how someone would address that or how that would happen if there were miscalculations. Then you could speak to someone personally and.
Yes, we have both the call center and what we call eligibility support workers.
Do you know if this is what's happening?
Have
you heard any reports of?
I think there are many calls to the call center for many different reasons. I don't know exactly. I can't tell you there were 10 cases today or. But
CGI, well, we can move on. I appreciate that. CGI, the contractor responsible for building HealthCare.gov. Can you explain your role with them in the last weeks of September? Did you, were you in contact with them? Were you working with them one-on-one? Were you in their office?
Yes, I actually, I moved down to Herndon and lived in a hotel since September 10th to about the last week of October. Mm-hmm. And I worked at CGI almost every day.
So you were actually there in their offices, working out of their offices? Okay.
Yes.
One of the things that's happened, I've got about a minute left on my time. The president announced a tech surge to fix the website. Who's involved in this surge?
Todd Park is involved, and there are two fellows, one by the name of Mikey Dickerson and another by the name of Greg Gershman.
Do you know about their compensation? How are they being compensated?
I have no insight to that.
Mm-hmm. Do they have a contract, or did they have to sign an agreement?
I don't know.
Who do these individuals report to?
I'm not sure who they have a contract with or whether if they.
So, but you are in charge of the technical component to HealthCare.gov, and they don't report to you?
No, they're part of a tech surge team that's being led by Jeff Zients.
Okay, so Jeff Zients is really the person that they are reporting to.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Gentlelady yields back. Now go to Mr. Olson for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and welcome Mr. Chao. As you can imagine, sir, folks back home in Texas 22 have one simple question. Why? Why did HealthCare.gov.com rollout.gov on October 1st, with most people in CMS, including yourself, and every contractor writing the codes and doing the testing said, stop, 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 stop. We need more time. This red team document is frightening. I refer you to page 4 of the document. Terms like limited end-to-end testing, parallel stacking of all phases. Stacking is vertical, not parallel. Insufficient time and scope of end-to-end testing. Launch at full volume. And I refer you to your 7/16 email, which you said you're worried that, and this is a quote, crash the plane, takeoff. With all due respect, sir, it never got to the runway. It was still waiting at the ramp there, waiting for the pilots, the bags, the fuel, waiting for new tires. Using your analogy and my record as a naval aviator, HealthCare.gov was a quote-unquote hangar queen, never ready to fly. I do want to talk about the folks back home I work for are most concerned about protection of their personal health information. With so little testing, they're concerned about the lack of security control assessments, SCAs. And my question I'll refer you to the document brief there, and on please turn to tab 2, sir. My question concerns, you guys said that this is a document you wrote for Ms. Tavender, that you need a 2-part mitigation plan. In part 2 is basically you said one of the recommended steps is to, quote, conduct a full SCA test on the FFM in a stable environment where all security controls can be tested within 60 to 90 days of going live on October 1st. The FFM will not be completed by November 30th. So how can you conduct a full test of the SCA within 60 days of open enrollment? How can that happen when you're losing 30 days right off the bat?
I think the 60 to 90 days refers to the inclusion of the final piece that needs to be built. What we mentioned earlier, which I just want to say that it's actually 30% of the systems are left to be developed, not 70%. And that 30% represents the payment aspect and the accounting aspects of making payments in the marketplace for all marketplaces, not just for federally facilitated marketplaces, and that functionality has to be in place for the January 1st effective date enrollments. And so I think once we have that completed, we could do a full SCA across the entire system.
But, sir, the document says October 1st rollout, 69 days after that. And apparently right now we're going back to at least November 1st at the earliest for the rollout. I don't see how you can get 60 days or 9 days of testing before we're going live again. One further question about the SCAs. How many SCAs did you identify and fix before the rollout on October 1st? How many have been identified and fixed after rollout? And how many are still out there? What's the scope that my constituents should be worried about?
The most important aspect is that there are no high findings in the SCA test as of the October 1st rollout. And as I mentioned earlier, I read off a list of mitigation activities that we go over and above any system that we deploy and put in operations and monitor on a daily basis.
When can you assure us that a full SCA will be conducted, system-wide? Ever?
When the last pieces of the system are completely built, which is not, I don't want people to think that there hasn't been a full SCA. Full SCA has been conducted on the pieces that were needed for October 1st for eligibility enrollment. We still have to build the financial management aspects of the system, which includes our accounting system and payment system and reconciliation system. Those will also have security testing involved as well.
And the full end-to-end testing, the whole full system, when can we expect that to occur, sir? What date?
I don't have an exact date, but it should be sometime in December.
So 2013, not 2014, 2015, 2016?
Correct.
2013. Okay, sir. One final question. I want to refer back to your email from July 16th about needing to feel more confident about the HealthCare.gov. I'm assuming that sometime in the last 4 months you got that confidence. What gave you that confidence? What was the trigger mechanism? When did that happen? Something changed in the last 4 months.
I didn't say anything about having more confidence. I'm always cautious, which is what I was trying to say earlier, is that until this is fixed, until the vast majority of people who are having good experience going through here, and we have people who want to enroll, get enrolled, particularly for January 1st, I'm going to continue to focus on that along with the rest of the team. And, so it's not really about confidence level right now. It's about focusing on fixing the problem.
And so we're not flying yet. The hangar queen is still at the hangar. I yield back balance my time.
I think the gentleman can yield back. What we're going to do is give each side 5 more total minutes. Ms. DeGette has a couple clarifying questions. I have a couple clarifying questions. If anybody from my side needs some time, we'll do that real quick. Ms. DeGette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chao, I want to thank you for coming and spending the morning with us. I'm going to try to be quick because I'd like you to get back to wherever you're going to make this thing work, okay? The first thing I want to clear up, because even though I thought we established it, my friends on the other side continued to ask you about this McKinsey document at tab 1, and I just want to clarify, you weren't part of this red team evaluation, is that right?
Correct.
And you didn't really see this document until today, is that correct?
Correct.
So there were a lot of questions people asked you, hypothetical questions people asked you about this evaluation that you really don't know the answer to because you weren't involved in the process and you didn't see the document till today, right?
Correct.
Now, as I understand it, this evaluation was done in March, April 2013. Is that your understanding as well, this McKinsey evaluation?
It's approximately that time.
And do you have any knowledge of what that evaluation was supposed to be for? Was it a snapshot in time, or do you even know?
From the interviews that I had with McKinsey, it was about really two things. One was I spent some time helping McKinsey understand the program, meaning how it worked, where we were in terms of status and schedule. I suppose it also includes a point in time kind of assessment because I educated them on exactly what was happening up to the date.
Up to that time. Now, on page 4 of this assessment, I don't really want you to respond to this because you weren't involved in the document, but I do want to point out there were a lot of questions that were asked today about the current situation, evolving requirements, multiple definitions of success, etc. But the people who were asking those questions today didn't talk about the last thing, which is in bold letters in a box that says, CMS has been working to mitigate challenges resulting from program characteristics. This was in March or April. And so without talking about this document necessarily, but I think what your testimony, what your job is really to identify issues throughout and try to mitigate them. Is that right?
Correct.
And that's what you've tried to do throughout.
It is a constant mitigation set of activities.
And the administration has said it's going to try to have the federal exchange site working for 80% of the people by the end of November. Is that right? That's what we've been reading in the press.
That's what the press quoted. I think
Okay.
what we've been saying is the vast majority of.
All right. And do you believe that that's a reasonable goal at this point?
I think that's an attainable goal given what I've seen so far.
Do you think it's going to happen?
I don't think there's any guarantees. I think we're still in a stage where we're trying to apply as much due diligence, acquiring additional assistance, the tech surge, looking at performance, fixing the functional defects, along with making sure that security monitoring is on an ongoing basis. So I think there are still a lot of moving parts that it wouldn't be prudent to give 100% guarantees about where we're going to be at on an exact. But I think we're on the right track.
Okay, but what I will say to you is truly, and you've heard this from all of us were disappointed that it didn't work on October 1st. I'm sure you were too.
Very.
And so we need this to be essentially working ASAP. For one thing, people who want insurance coverage as of January 1st have to sign up by December 15th. So if it's not working for the vast majority of people by the end of November, that's going to be hard to do. Understood?
We certainly understand that.
Okay. One last thing. Someone had asked you the question, or had made the assertion that 60% of the site was not working, but I'm told that's not really accurate, that it's really about 30% that's not working, and most of that is the back end, which is the payment to insurance companies. So that's not necessarily the part that has to be working at this moment.
Yeah,
is that
it's not
correct?
that it's not working. It's still being developed and tested.
Okay. Right. But that's the payment to the insurance companies,
Correct.
right?
Which involves testing with Treasury and others.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Recognize myself for 5 minutes. Just let me follow up here that what you're saying, this 30% is yet to develop on the payment end. On October 1, the day this went live, how much of the site was developed at that time?
Probably, 100% of all the priorities that were set for by the business for October 1st, it was up and running.
Okay, but what about the other parts?
I think there was a reprioritization associated with like shop employer, shop employee, and the Spanish website that was.
But it was crashing for everybody. We've heard that it wasn't designed for that many people. It didn't pass a stress test. It never had end-to-end testing. And you're saying it was 100% ready?
No.
I just want to make sure I understand. What
When it was 100% built.
100% built, but just not working.
Yeah, working functionally and.
Well, then that's not
well, that's
built. If a car is built, but you can't run the car, that car's not built. If a website isn't working, it's not built. So.
Oh, I'm certainly not going to sit here and try to tell you that it was working well. So I do.
Yeah, but you said on October 1 it was 100% built. I really need to know, because you had said before you wish you had had more time. And you had just said to Ms. DeGette that your job was to identify issues and mitigate them. And since you would have liked to have had more time and your job was to mitigate them, would you have liked to have seen this whole report from McKinsey that identified the problems so you didn't have to find them out?
I don't think it was necessary, because I think this report was really for Marilyn Tavenner and others, and it was written for that level of consumption and that audience.
But you haven't seen it, so you don't know. Or do you know?
I'm just assuming that's why I wasn't.
Okay, I just want you to stick with the facts you know. So, well, what I'm seeing here is from March on, Marianne Bowen, Jim Kerr, Todd Park, Brian Sivak, Michelle Snyder, Gary Cohen, Bill Corr, Mike Hash, Ariana Khalid, Todd Park, Catherine Sebelius, William Schultz, Michelle Snyder, Brian Sivak, Marilyn Tavenner, Mark Childress, Jean Lambrew, and Ellen Montz all had briefings on this. Are those any people you work with?
I've been in meetings with several of those folks.
Several of them since March and April?
Yes.
And none of them raised any of these concerns to you, and you identified yourself as your job is to identify issues and mitigate them. But none of them identified that with all these interviews and the 200 documents reviewed, that there were these problems.
Within my day-to-day operational, requirements to manage the contract, to manage schedule, to manage staff, and
yeah, but what you don't measure, you can't manage. And so I'm concerned that this list of people who you work with were not communicating to you this document that you knew something existed because you indeed were interviewed on it yourself. But here we have this messy rollout that didn't work, that crashed, that only 6 people signed up the first day, and we still are concerned about problems. And yet it's puzzling to me why these key people just didn't talk to you about it. Do you have any? They gave you no hints that this existed?
Perhaps that I just was not included in certain discussions.
Well, if you knew then what you know now, would you have spoken up more with regard to rolling out this website on October 1?
I wish I had the luxury of a time machine to go back and change things, but I can't do that.
I understand that, but it is a matter that, did you ask someone at that time for more time?
No.
Why not?
Because my direction was from Marilyn Tavenner, is to deliver a system on October 1st.
So Marilyn Tavenner said deliver October 1. She had been in on these briefings from McKinsey that said there were serious problems. She was in at least 2 of them, I believe. And this was at HHS headquarters on April 4. She was there, and also at the Eisenhower Executive Office building on April 6th. She was there. She was briefed on these problems. She said, move it for October 1, and you as the man who is in charge of making sure this works, she didn't tell you that those problems existed. Is that what you're saying today?
I can't comment on that.
It's either she told you or she didn't tell you. I'm just curious.
I don't think she told me in the context of this briefing. I think we have status meetings all the time in which we talk about ways to mitigate and to...
So you met with her frequently over those months, but she never brought up the extent of these concerns?
Not the McKinsey report, no.
Okay.
I think we talked about certainly about issues and priorities for October 1st.
I see. Well, I have no further questions, so Mr. Chao, I appreciate you spending so much time with us today. We are going to take a real quick 5-minute break. We recognize our next panel of witnesses has been sitting here for a while, so we'll be right back in 5 minutes. And thank you again, Mr. Chao.
Thank you.
All right, this hearing is reconvened. I would now like to introduce the witnesses in the second panel for today's hearing, and thank you all for being so patient and waiting. Our first witness is Jason Pravadakis. He is the Senior Vice President and General Manager for the Center for Connected Government at MITRE Corporation. He is also the Director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Alliance to Modernize Medicare. Our second witness is Maggie Bauer. She is the Senior Vice President of Health Services at Creative Computing Solutions, Inc., also known as CCSI. She has extensive operations and management experience in consulting, program management, IT infrastructure services, software development, life cycle, and end-user support on service-level drive performance-based programs. And our third witness is David Amsler. He is the founder, president, and chief information officer at Foreground Security, Inc. He has more than 15 years of IT security experience, and he oversees the overall customer-centric vision and direction of Foreground Security, its industry-leading offerings and day-to-day operations. I'll now swear in the witnesses. You're all aware that the committee is holding an investigative hearing, and when doing so, has the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objections to testifying under oath?
No.
All the witnesses are negative there. The chair then advises you that under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, you are entitled to be advised by counsel. Do any of you desire to be advised by counsel during your testimony today? No. And all the witnesses have said no. In that case, would you please rise, raise your right hand, and I'll swear you in. You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. And all the witnesses responded, I do. You are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. You may now give a 5-minute opening summary of your statement, Mr. Pravakadis.
Yes. All right. Well, good morning, Chairman Murphy and Ranking Member DeGette. My name is Jason Pravadakis, and I am here today on behalf of the MITRE Corporation. I serve as the Director of the not-for-profit federally funded Research and Development Center, operated by MITRE and sponsored by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The MITRE Corporation is chartered in the public interest to apply systems engineering skills and advanced technology to address issues of critical national importance. We accomplish this through operation of research and development centers that support our government sponsors with scientific research and development, analysis and systems engineering and integration as well. Known as federally funded research development centers, they are operated under a set of rules and constraints prescribed by the Federal Acquisition Regulations. The rules are designed to preserve the FFRDC's objectivity, independence, and freedom from conflict of interest. MITRE operates FFRDC centers for 7 federal agency sponsors. We were awarded the contract to operate the CMS Alliance to Modernize Healthcare Center about a year ago, following a competitive bid. The center is charged with assisting CMS in modernizing its operations and supporting the implementation of health reform and the expansion of health care to millions of Americans. MITRE serves as a technical, independent, objective advisor to CMS. We've been supporting CMS successfully since about 2005 on a contract basis prior to the establishment of the new center. We advise on health IT, help plan develop future policies. We provide technical evaluations and objective evaluation of business models and assess new technology. As part of its efforts to establish HealthCare.gov, CMS asked MITRE to conduct security assessments on parts of the site. And I appreciate the opportunity to clarify what our role was in assisting CMS on HealthCare.gov. We provide CMS with information security support and guidance under 2 contracts, the Office of Information Systems and Enterprise Information Systems Group. Pursuant to tasks issued under those contracts, MITRE performed a total of 18 security control assessments, or SCAs, for components across the range of CMS enterprise systems. Most of these were performed on supporting infrastructure and development components. 6 of the SCAs were directly related to HealthCare.gov and were performed between September of 2012 and September of 2013. MITRE performs various tasks as part of overall support for CMS enterprise security maintenance. A limited amount of that support is in the form of external penetration testing relative to CMS websites, including HealthCare.gov. MITRE is not in charge of security for HealthCare.gov. We were not asked, nor did we perform end-to-end security testing. We have no view on the overall safety or security status of HealthCare.gov. MITRE did not and does not recommend approval of or disapproval of an authority to operate. Deciding whether and when to grant an ATO is inherently a governmental function that derives from the government's assessment of overall risk posture. In this case, the government made its ATO decisions based on a large set of inputs and factors, among which were 6 SCAs performed by MITRE. We do not have visibility into the many other factors that went into the government's ATO decision. CMS did not advise MITRE whether or when ATOs were granted for the marketplace components being tested. In this case, the government made its ATO decisions based on a large set of data. Again, we were not asked to conduct end-to-end testing. Rather, we test specific parts of HealthCare.gov under a set of specific parameters established by CMS. We worked alongside the CMS-designated contractor in the course of testing to remediate risks as high, and in almost all cases, we succeeded. Our testing was accomplished in accordance with standard SA engineering methodologies. In each case, we assessed component security control risks against CMS-defined security control parameters on a high, moderate to low scale, and we recommended appropriate risk mitigations. On-site security control assessment testing typically begins on a Monday and wraps up within a week. It tests against CMS-defined security control parameters. Over the course of 5 days of testing, MITRE identifies the risk and assigns the remediation priorities for risk judged to be high and moderate levels. Security testing is designed to flesh out and pinpoint the security weakness of a digital information system. This enables corrective remediations to be applied and also allows the system operator to make necessary business judgments and trade-offs about the overall system. Because our role in performing the security control test was limited in both time and scope, MITRE has no insight into how assessed security control risks were handled or what other risks may have surfaced subsequent to the date of testing. Judgments about the potential impact of assessed security control risk on overall system operation or performance were business judgments made by CMS as part of the operating authority. Through our broader partnership with the federal government, we remain committed to assisting CMS in working to enhance the care and delivery of health care for all Americans. I'd be happy to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now turn to Ms. Bauer for her opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member DeGette. My name is Maggie Bauer, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Creative Computing Solutions, Inc., CCSI. I have responsibility for CCSI's federal health contracts, including the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Veterans Affairs, the Department of Health and Human Services National Institutes of Health, and the Military Health Service. In addition to health-related services, CCSI delivers program and project management services, cybersecurity services, and enterprise systems engineering exclusively to the federal government. CCSI was founded in 1992 by Dr. Manju Butra. In August of 2012, CMS awarded CCSI a contract to provide security oversight of the CMS eCloud. The eCloud refers to CMS's virtual data center, which hosts systems and applications that support the Affordable Care Act. Foreground Security is our subcontractor, and we function as a fully integrated team. CCSI's role on this contract is to provide security operations monitoring and management, including 24/7 by 365 security monitoring from a Secure Operations Center, otherwise known as a SOC. We monitor the perimeter firewalls and network devices for the eCloud, and we scan applications for security incidents. These scans do not measure or track availability, up-down times, or latency. If we detect an anomaly, we follow the CMS-approved incident response plan procedures for identified security incidents, such as network security configuration flaws or vulnerabilities in the network, security devices, or in applications. CCSI's contract does not extend to remediating security incidents. CCSI's scope of work includes configuration, tuning, monitoring, and management of CMS government-furnished equipment that resides in the Verizon Terramark Security Monitoring Zone. We review log files, we conduct event analysis, we provide reporting on security incidents, all of this under the direction and supervision of CMS. Activities involving the development, scaling, testing, release, or administration of the Federal Exchange Program, HealthCare.gov, the Federal Exchange, or the federally facilitated marketplace are not within the scope of our contract. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barr. Mr. Amsler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member DeGette, members of the subcommittee, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing on the security of the website HealthCare.gov. I am the President and Chief Information Officer of Foreground Security. I also founded the company. We provide cybersecurity consulting, training, and services for both private sector and government agencies. Our clients include Fortune 100 companies, smaller but highly targeted firms, and government agencies. We defend our customers against an increasingly intricate threat and threat actors through an integrated approach that entails building security architecture and assessing, monitoring, and responding to attacks against our customer environments. Foreground Security is a small but growing, dedicated cybersecurity business located in Herndon, Virginia, and Florida. Our roughly 100 employees are highly trained and committed to serving our clients. Foreground Security is one of the companies hired to help develop a robust operational security management program for the new virtual data center created to implement the Affordable Care Act. We are a subcontractor to our teammate, Creative Computing Solutions, Inc., or CCSI, which is the prime contractor for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Our role with CCSI includes a number of objectives relating to the security environment of HealthCare.gov. I think of our role as encompassing 3 phases. First is the creation of the security monitoring environment. This entailed getting key staff in place, identifying needed security monitoring software and hardware, and building out a dedicated Security Operations Center, or SOC, from which all monitoring is performed. Second is building those security monitoring capabilities identified in Phase 1 into the cloud environment itself. This has been the most challenging part of our contract, in large part because we have had to construct security monitoring capabilities while the system itself is being built. Our work on this phase continues. And third is actually monitoring the environment, which itself can be thought of as having 2 components. One is day-to-day, continuously searching for malicious activities, including reporting and defending against them when they do occur. The other is monitoring known malicious actors or groups in advance of attacks to proactively identify the techniques or tactics they may be using or planning to use to compromise this environment. These are our main end-state responsibilities relating to the security environment. We've worked very closely with CMS and Verizon Terramark on all phases of our work. CMS reviews and approves any capability we place in the environment, and Verizon Terramark, as the host of the environment, helps determine what security measures are placed in the virtual data center. Perspective on our role is important. While our work for CMS is essential, it is narrowly focused, and we're not involved in the design of the site, developing the software that runs it, or its administration. To that end, we do not monitor the site for performance purposes. Foreground Security is just one member of the security team, in addition to the other companies represented today here on this panel. Verizon Terramark, URS, CGI, and QSSI all play key roles in developing and testing the security of HealthCare.gov. I am proud of the work that Foreground Security has undertaken and continues to undertake in order to allow families and individuals looking for health insurance to use the HealthCare.gov website, secure in the knowledge that their personal information is being protected with state-of-the-art monitoring and defenses. To this point, Foreground Security has fulfilled its obligations to CMS on time and under budget. We are dedicated to secure the operation of HealthCare.gov and take extremely seriously our obligations to the public trust. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Amsler. A couple questions I want to begin with. First of all, starting with you, Mr. Amsler. You were here for throughout Mr. Chao's testimony. All 3 of you were. Do you have any concerns about any comments that was made by Mr. Chao?
I wouldn't have any specific concerns.
Ms. Bauer?
The voice.
No.
Ms. Providakis?
No concerns.
All right. Mr. Amsler, You had said that in addition to the other companies represented today in this panel, Verizon, Tower Mark, URS, CGI, and QSSI all played key roles in developing and testing the security of HealthCare.gov. Are you also referring to Ms. Bauer's company played a role in this?
I view them as our teammate. I view them as one of us.
Because I thought in her testimony she said that they were not that involved. So let me ask you, with this many companies involved, who did you all report to?
Our customer was CMS, and the security team.
Is there a person?
Our direct government technical lead, his name is Tom Shankweiler.
And with regard to this, with all these companies involved who are playing key roles in developing and testing security, is that typical to have so many companies involved as opposed to one that's trying to do the end-to-end work on this?
Well, we've experienced all sizes of implementations. This one is obviously certainly one of the largest that I've ever seen undertaken. I've certainly seen lots of people involved, but probably not this many.
Mr. Parvadakis, is this typical to have so many companies involved in dealing with the security on a site?
Not knowing the number of companies that are involved, but having 2 or 3 is not untypical to have on a complexity of a site like
I just wonder if that added to the complexity of trying to monitor security of the site.
If it's well managed from a program perspective.
Was it well managed?
I would not know.
From your perspective?
We weren't involved in that level of insights on that. I believe.
Ms. Bauer, were you involved in that level, and was it well managed from your point of view?
Our management from CMS has been on a very regular basis. We have daily meetings. In fact, since HealthCare.gov went live, those meetings actually began, or ramped up, I should say, to hourly, and then backed away to about every 4 hours, and now they're on a shift basis, so 3 times a day.
You said activities involving the development, scaling, testing, release, or administration of the Federal Exchange Program System, HealthCare.gov, the Federal Exchange, or the Federally Facilitated Marketplace, or FFM, are not within the scope of your contract. So you were not involved in the security issues involved with those websites?
The security, yes, but not the development, scaling, or testing of the HealthCare.gov application.
Were you involved with the testing of the security?
Yes.
And was it working?
Yes.
At October 1?
Everything that was under our scope.
Under your scope?
Yes.
But in terms of how it relates to other parts, you don't know?
I would not know that.
Okay. Mr. Amser, how about for you? Were your parts working okay in your individual part, and was that also tested with regard to the others?
Congressman, to be clear, as far as our work is concerned, our focused work around operational monitoring, security, and some testing, we absolutely were working. I can't speak to the rest of the groups and the teams that were involved in development or even the SCA.
So what I'm trying to find out is that typical, atypical, and would you be concerned about how your parts worked in conjunction with the site overall, or is that not typically a question you would ask? Well, it's like this. If you design a part for a car and you know your part's working, would you like to know if the car works?
Absolutely.
And so that's what I'm asking all of you. Would you like to know that if your segments may have worked on their own, but you didn't know whether it worked with the whole system and security? Is that correct, Mr. Parvadakis?
Well, that would be correct.
Ms. Bauer?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Parvadakis, CMS adopted the security controls you developed, correct?
That's correct.
And are these controls embedded in the applications at the direction of CMS?
They were assessed, but yes, they were embedded. For example, configuration changes would be made based on the configuration controls.
And at what point of the application development phase should security controls begin to be embedded into the application?
Well, at the production phase, when we test, generally when we test for an SCA, we're assuming that we are looking at the production-ready version of the application. And then we apply those CMS security controls we talked about and assess those against the production-ready version of that application.
Are they embedded into the architecture of HealthCare.gov?
The overall CMS enterprise security controls are to be applied across all the systems of HealthCare.gov.
But they should be embedded then into HealthCare.gov?
It should be.
Were they?
I have no way of knowing that.
Ms. Bauer, do you know if they were?
I do not know.
Mr. Amsler?
I would know the answer to that.
Okay. But you all worked on these security parts. We don't know if they were embedded, and you don't know if anybody did testing, but you would have liked to have seen that. Am I correct with all of you?
Just some parts.
Ms. Bauer?
Correct.
Correct. Mr. Amsler?
Correct.
Thank you. And now we'll yield to Mr. Giff for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Chao testified, it's part of CMS's protocols that they hire independent contractors to test different parts of the security aspects of the site. Is that your understanding as well, Mr. Provodakis?
Yes, it is.
And is it yours, Ms. Bauer? Yes. And is it yours, Mr. Amsler?
Yes.
So, Mr. Provodakis, I want to ask you first. You testified your company was not hired to do perform end-to-end security testing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, what your job was to assess and identify risks in specific components of HealthCare.gov, to work with CMS, and to address those concerns and report on the findings and results. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And am I correct that in virtually all cases, when you did identify high risks in HealthCare.gov components, CMS was able to mitigate those risks before the system went live?
Yes, almost all the high risks were mitigated.
And you said in your testimony, in your written testimony, MITRE is not in charge of security for HealthCare.gov. We were not asked, nor did we perform end-to-end security testing. We have no view of the overall safety or security status of HealthCare.gov. That's because you were only asked to do a narrow assessment of part of it, right?
A narrow assessment in scope and in a time.
In time. Now, I just want to ask you, what's your personal view of the overall safety or security of HealthCare.gov, having worked on this, at least some aspects of it?
Well, just from a personal perspective, knowing CMS experience in the past, as Henry Chao alluded to, they do a very solid job in terms of securing their systems, historically.
And what you were doing was part of the same types of things CMS has done to secure their systems in the past.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Ms. Bauer, now, as I understand it, Mr. Amsler, your company works sort of as a subcontractor of Ms. Bauer's company. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what you folks do is your company, CCSI, monitors the firewalls and network devices for the eCloud that hosts HealthCare.gov and scans the website's application for security vulnerabilities. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And on October 22nd, you briefed this committee, and I want to ask you, at that time, had you detected any activity that you would consider to be out of the ordinary for a system like this?
Not out of the ordinary, no.
Okay. And are you continuing to monitor the website moving forward?
Yes, we continue to perform all the functions of our contract.
And why is that?
I'm sorry?
Why are you continuing to monitor the functions?
Because that's the scope of our contract, is continually
and
monitoring.
have you detected any activity since October 22nd that you considered to be out of the ordinary?
Well, we would detect activity on a daily, if not hourly basis. That's part of the nature of security monitoring. Whether it's extreme or out of the ordinary, there's nothing that's been brought to my attention that would.
And would that be then reported to CMS?
Yes, there's an incident response plan, and we follow the procedures of that plan.
And have you seen anything that would indicate some terrible problem with the website vis-a-vis security?
Nothing that I've seen or that's been escalated to me, no.
Okay. And there's another contractor, as I understand, that's also been asked to look at other aspects, and that's Verizon. They're not here today. Is that your understanding as well? Yes. So is Ms. Bauer, has your company worked with CMS before? Mr. Provodakis said his has on security issues.
No, we have not, but we do have other security work.
Okay. And Mr. Amsler, what about your company?
Not directly for CMS, but other HHS.
Okay, so you wouldn't know whether this is kind of mirrors other security activity with CMS. But Mr. Provodakis, you're telling me that with what your company has done before, you're seeing a similar concern and readiness for security applications.
Well, what I said was that following CMS's approach towards security, they do execute, 10, 20, 70 SCAs a year that we actually executed for CMS. So they're part of their processes before they execute an ATO. They look for the input of these SCAs, which is a fairly rigorous process of definition, defining a parameter in a moment of time that we would conduct these SCAs for CMS as input to the ATO process.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Can I ask clarification of something Mr. Getz said? She asked you a question about CMS and their work on this, and you used the word historically. Were you referring then to the HealthCare.gov website, or in the past there were?
In the past, broadly across CMS in terms of their security rigor that they apply across their systems.
Thank you. Mr. Olson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I mostly want to thank the witnesses for your patience being here. It's been a long day. I know that. Very brief questions. I mean, getting HealthCare.gov up and running is not rocket scientists. And that's good, because if it were, we'd still be waiting to land on the moon over 50 years later. You may not have seen the McKinsey report, the Red Team report. Have you all seen that?
I have not.
Okay, I'll get the copies to you. I just want to ask some questions about the report, and I apologize that you haven't seen it. But it compares on page 4 ideal large-scale programs and the current state of HealthCare.gov. And I want you to just some yes or no questions. Do you agree with the statements from this report? And again, it's comparing large-scale program development ideal program with the characteristics of HealthCare.gov. The first ideal situation, clear articulation of requirements and success metrics. In HealthCare.gov, evolving requirements and multiple definitions of success. Do you agree with those assessments? That's ideal? And that's what's happened with HealthCare.gov, Mr. Provokidis? Yes or no, sir? Don't want to put you on the spot.
It's very difficult to answer that question. Is that a hypothetical question in terms of...
Hypothetical, yes, sir. I mean, the ideal program is in clear articulation. And has that happened on HealthCare.gov?
In the best world, you would love to have clear articulated requirements up front that you can design to, build to, test to, and that would be great. Although it's rare, but that would be great.
Okay. Involving requirements with HealthCare.gov, has that been a problem?
I'm not sure of the number of requirements. I would think there were quite a number of requirements for HealthCare.gov.
Ms. Bauer?
I would, just having looked at it briefly, I
apologize for that, ma'am.
I would agree with the description of the ideal situation. However, I wouldn't have insight into the current situation because that involves the development of HealthCare.gov, which is not.
Mr. Amsler?
I agree with ideal. Again, we weren't involved in those aspects, so I couldn't speak to it.
How about the program there? Ideal is sequential requirements, design, build, and testing, and iteration, revision between phases. And what the current situation is, parallel stacking of all phases. Do you agree, Mr. Provokidis? I apologize, sir, for not...
I'm sorry, it's fine.
What ideal is and what...
It would create significant challenges to the program office to deliver that.
Has there been parallel stacking?
It would be a significant challenge to do that.
Ms. Bauer?
I would agree with that statement.
Mr. Amsler?
Agree.
Okay, how about end-to-end integrated operations and testing is the ideal? I think we all agree with that. And what's happened is insufficient time and scope of end-to-end testing. Would you all agree with those statements? Yes or no?
I guess in the context you put it, you're saying, is there limited end-to-end testing? And given the fact you have a hard date, I would surmise they had limited time to do end-to-end testing. It doesn't mean you couldn't have done it. It just meant there's limited time to do it.
Ms. Bauer?
Yeah, generally, I would agree. I would have no insight, though, into what the increments were as regards the schedule. But, you could create milestones and achieve, ideally, just about any goal if you create the milestones and achieve them on the way to the goal.
Mr. Amsler?
End-to-end testing, for me, is pure security. That's the world we lived in, and that's the world we only live in. We can achieve a lot testing along the way, but I always shoot for ideal. Ideal would be end-to-end testing.
And ideal, a limited initial launch or a full launch? Not ideal. Last question, yes or no? Do you agree with those statements? Launch at full volume is not very good. Limited initial launch, what we should be seeking.
Well, a limited launch increases the risk, obviously, than a full. To increase risk.
Yep. Ms. Bauer?
I would actually suggest that perhaps a limited launch would have had a lower risk, and that a full launch may have a larger risk, whatever system you'd be deploying.
Mr. Amsler?
I agree with Ms. Bauer's statement.
Well said, sir. And one final question. Again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but with all your knowledge about how this program rolled out, are you comfortable putting yourselves and your families and your personal information into HealthCare.gov?
I have.
You're comfortable? Yes.
It's a personal choice that you have to make based on, in my case, where knowing the limited amount of personal information I put up there and other information, I feel comfortable personally, but that might not apply to everyone.
Ms. Bauer, yes or no, ma'am? Comfortable?
Yes.
Mr. Amsler?
I'm actually very happy with my current health care.
Oh, boy, you're trying to open a hornet's nest there.
Well, too bad you can't
Background's my
keep it.
time.
It's down to it. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Gett, you have a clarifying question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The questions that Mr. Olson was asking you folks were on this McKinsey document that we spent so much time with the last witness talking about, tab 1 of the notebook. Have you seen that report before, Mr. Providakis?
I am familiar with this report.
Okay. Ms. Bauer, have you seen it?
No, I have not.
And Mr. Amsler, have you seen it?
I have not.
Okay. So, Mr. Providakis, the two of you, then Ms. Bauer and Mr. Amsler, any answers you were giving were really just based on speculation, since you haven't seen it, weren't involved with it. Is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Amsler?
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Providakis. So Mr. Olson was asking you about some of these recommendations. This is from last spring. It was a snapshot in time on page 4 of that report at the bottom, where he was talking about evolving requirements, multiple definitions of success, et cetera. The part he forgot to mention, which was the part also I noticed they forgot to mention when the previous witness was up, is the part that's in the box in bold type at the bottom of all of those current situation bullets, which says CMS has been working to mitigate challenges resulting from program characteristics. Do you see that?
I do see
What
that.
does that mean to you?
Well, it means to me that they recognize the risk and the challenge of the program, and they were looking at options or mitigation approaches that would minimize the risk.
So CMS hired McKinsey to do an evaluation of the program and come up with some concerns that they could then work to mitigate. Is that right?
Only what I, yes.
And that's the same reason they hired your company to do security assessments, is to find places where there might be problems and to make recommendations that they could then work to mitigate. Is that right?
That's correct. Identify risks and mitigate risks.
And in your view, at least the recommendations your company made, did they in fact work to mitigate those risks?
In the context of the SCA, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions.
Had you seen this document before today, Mr. Providakis?
I am familiar of the document. It's been a while.
So you're familiar. So when they say they've been working to mitigate challenges, you are personally aware that some of these mitigations were taking place, or you're just saying so today?
No, I have no idea of what mitigation, whether they took the recommendations of this or not.
I was curious because you were drawing a conclusion, but I didn't know if you would see. So that's based upon just a guess today. Okay.
My opinion, yes.
So a quick thing, Mr. Amsler, while developing the security measures for the cloud environment, have you encountered any challenges at all?
Certainly, lots of challenges along the way. Congressman, did you mean more implementing them or certain things?
Sort of some things that are different from what you're used to here, or anything standing out to you that's a concern with regard to the cloud environment and the security there?
Well, cloud in and of itself brings a unique set of challenges that us in the industry are all trying to deal with.
Well, that's a system that you can't necessarily correct right now with the cloud environment. It's on its own. It's a secure concern.
Agreed. It is one of our biggest challenges that we're facing as an industry today, that being the cybersecurity.
Who's in charge of that cloud environment?
Verizon, Terramark, and I assume you mean actually owns it, yes, and controls it.
And how difficult is it to develop these security measures while the system is being built?
That would not be ideal.
Do you have all the tools and capabilities now to successfully and fully monitor the system?
I'm a unique animal in that I live, eat, and breathe cybersecurity, and as a company we do, so we always strive for better. I'm always striving to make it the best.
Do you have all the tools now you need to fully monitor the system?
We have a set of controls that exceed any standard set of controls.
I understand you're trying to do a great job. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to get a sense of, have you been limited in any way in your ability to do all the things you would like to do with your excellent team in place?
There are some things that we have asked for that are not in place as of yet.
Really, such as what?
These would, they're very technical in nature. Again, we have a standard set of controls,
Sure.
but we're always
Mr.
shooting
Chairman,
for
we
more.
might want to have him give us that information.
Yeah,
in
could you let us
private.
know that?
I
Is
would
that
be
something you
happy.
would like to do in private instead of public? Would that be
I would
better?
be happy to get with my team and get with.
I appreciate that.
the-
Ms. Barr, do you have all the tools necessary to fully?
Well, our answers are essentially the same because we're an integrated team.
I see.
would agree with Dave.
All right. And Mr. Pravadakis, do you have all the tools necessary to fully do your work here?
Well, we're in a slightly different role, but yes.
I see. So let me ask this then, with regard to how things are. Is the system, have there been any attempts under what you've monitored, Ms. Bauer and Mr. Amsler, any attempts to hack into the system that you can tell?
Congressman, the simple answer is yes. The longer answer is I don't have an environment where it's not being attacked today, though.
I understand. So with regard to this then, is the system now, are you saying that it's fully secure from external hackers trying to get in?
We live in a world of not if, but more when. That's the nature of the world we live in today. So I can never give you a guarantee that someone's not going to get in. It's probably going to happen at some point, but we have designed it to limit the damage and identify it as quick as possible.
So we cannot at this point sign off to say the system is fully secure. It's an ongoing process, you're saying?
It's an always ongoing process. Today, I feel comfortable with the capabilities we have put in place, but I'm always striving for more.
I understand. And Ms. Barr, would you agree with that assessment?
I would. Dave is answering it.
You have to talk in your microphone. We can't hear you.
Technical perspective, but I would say that from our perspective with regard to the tools and appliances we have in place right now today, the system is secure. As Dave says, security is always evolving. It's always dynamic and ongoing, and we're always going to want to do better and keep on top of the latest technology and the latest appliances, so it will always be maturing. But as regards the scope of our contract and the appliances and tools and processes we have in place, we are confident.
I mean, I appreciate your standards of excellence, and I appreciate you understand this is an evolving process. But given the concerns for security, what I'm hearing from you is nobody can really give a 100% guarantee that this website is secure with regard to the data that has the personally identifiable information. As people put those things in there, no one can guarantee that some hacker isn't going to try and get into it, and that they will continue to try and probe until they get through. Is that what you're saying?
But I also would say the same thing about Facebook or any banking website as well.
Sure.
It's just unfortunately the world we live in today.
I appreciate that. Same with you, Ms. Bauer?
Yeah, and I think the critical factor is the rigor with which we have procedures in place to identify any risks, any vulnerabilities, and then work to mitigate them, and we have very robust procedures in place for that.
Very good. Well, I appreciate the comments from the panel today, and I ask unanimous consent that the written opening statements of other members be introduced into the record if they so will. And without objection, those documents will be in the record. I also ask unanimous consent that the contents of the document binder be introduced in the record to authorize staff to make appropriate redactions. And without objection, the documents will be entered into the record with any redactions that staff determines are appropriate. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all the witnesses and members that participated in today's hearing. I remind members they have 10 business days to submit questions to the record, and I ask that the witnesses all please agree to answer promptly to the questions, and we will work out some mechanism to answer some in confidential in-camera discussions. And with that, this hearing is concluded.